Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Heavenly Father, please help me to speak the truth and the truth as deeply and as fully as I am able. Help me to act with utmost integrity and wisdom, and please help this be of help and aid to other survivors and other people interested in learning more about these topics. Amen.
Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to have back on the show for a second time satanic ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse survivor, overcomer, and whistleblower, military veteran, former private contractor, anti-piracy operator and bodyguard, prison and health industry reform activist, podcaster, and host of his own YouTube channel and podcast called Survivor's Story, men's trauma and sexual abuse advocate, and the wolf in the lion's den, roaring in the face of evil, Daniel. In case you're new here, or if you missed Daniel's outstanding first episode, here's a brief recap of what we talked about last time. Born into an expatriate family in Nigeria, Daniel's childhood was a facade of privilege masking deep fear and neglect. Surrounded by wealth and walls, an inexplicable terror haunted him, rooted in the experiences he couldn't yet name. As a young man, Daniel poured his intensity into high-stakes career in security and military service, excelling in elite forces, private contracting in the Middle East, anti-piracy missions off Somalia, and protecting high-profile figures. But beneath his capable exterior simmered self-loathing, rage, and suicidal ideation he just couldn't explain. Disillusioned by the greed driving his military work, he turned to a spiritual quest, diving deep into personal development and somatic therapy with fierce commitment. In 2020, however, a seismic shift occurred. Through holistic therapies, repressed memories of childhood sexual abuse, rape and torture by multiple perpetrators erupted in visceral flashbacks, plunging Daniel into psychosis and paranoia. Forgiveness became his lifeline. Initially resistant, fearing it betrayed those who suffered with him, Daniel embraced it as liberation, not absolution. By severing ties with his abusers and setting firm boundaries, he found safety to forgive from afar, transforming resentment into love. Through relentless psychological work, he integrated his trauma with purpose. Now, Daniel channels his pain into advocacy through his podcast, Survivor Story, uplifting men's healing and amplifying survivors' voices. He stands resolute, inspiring others, especially men, to break the silence around male child sexual abuse. Daniel's message is very clear. Chains will be broken. I'm going to share Daniel's words once again. Every survivor is a hero. Set boundaries, forgive safely, and let love free you. Share your story, it matters. You can't shatter trauma's chains. From a wounded boy to a warrior of forgiveness, Daniel's journey calls others to face their pain, find their voice, and reclaim their light. In the riveting premiere and first episode of Daniel's testimony, he tore through the polished veneer of his childhood, exposing the hollow cover story of his early years. With unflinching courage, he guided us through the seismic resurfacing of his true memories, unlocked through MDMA-assisted therapy. What began as haunting recollections of sexual abuse unraveled into horrific visions of satanic rituals and child sacrifice. Daniel's raw, hard-on-sleeve vulnerability captivated us, amplified by gripping video footage of his ab reactions, real, raw-time glimpses into a survivor's battle to reclaim fragmented memories. Most astonishing was Daniel's radical act of forgiveness towards those who shattered his innocence, offering profound, uplifting lessons that linger like a beacon of hope. Did you guys miss that episode? You guys can catch part one before or after this episode. I will have the link in the show notes for you guys. Today, we are going to plunge deeper into Daniel's story post-revelation. We'll navigate his high-stakes clashes with the law, his struggles against the callous medical system, and the intricate family ties survivors must untangle to break free. We'll also continue to unveil Daniel's path to healing, stitching together shattered memories while rooted in unyielding faith. A modern-day hero, Daniel wields truth, compassion, and resilience as weapons to reclaim his power. The boy his abusers tried to destroy has risen into the leader he once needed, a living, breathing miracle. Daniel's story ignites a powerful truth through living example. Abuse survivors, against all odds, can rise from the ashes of their pain, forging unbreakable spirits that light the way for others to heal and triumph. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guests, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you were interested in submitting a written testimony for my upcoming book series or to be featured on a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. Additionally, I've teamed up with a couple of my favorite brands to offer you guys exclusive discount codes on products I personally love, such as Rife Technology frequency machines and CZTL's premium methylene blue. You can find all the relevant links and codes, along with other resources, in the show notes. Your support across all platforms is greatly appreciated, especially as I've had to shift to alternative streaming platforms such as Rumble and X following the termination of my former YouTube channel. I've recently started a new YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I'm currently rebuilding and almost finishing uploading all of my old videos as well. This transition to multiple platforms is crucial to continue sharing vital information with the public and disclosure community. So thank you all wholeheartedly on the other side of the screen for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every guest on the show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, walking miracle, man of God, content creator, passionate purveyor of truth, absolute warrior, and a man on a mission to set the captives free and to make the world a better and safer place for our children. The one, the only, Daniel. Daniel, what an honor it is to have you back. Thank you for
Thank you,
being here
Emma.
again with us today.
Emma, you make such a good introduction. Thank you so much. I'm probably blushing a little bit, but I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Thank
You're,
you.
you're deserving of every word and then some.
Thank you.
Um, Thank you for being here. The last episode was really groundbreaking. I think the work you're doing on your own podcast and using the rawness of your voice and your truth to contribute to this community is just incredible. And I'm really excited to continue watching you
Mm,
grow. For people who weren't here last time, or if you missed that, like I said, I'll have it in the show notes. I definitely encourage you guys to go watch that in addition to Daniel's YouTube channel testimony videos. I'm going to have all that linked in the show notes for you guys, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, more of his projects, and we'll go over his YouTube channel and show that. But the
mm,
last episode, we gave some really powerful visuals on some of the things that you guys hear survivors talk about a lot, such as memory recollection, abreactions, some things that a lot of us, I don't think, learn about in our traditional academia and can feel sort of disconnected from understanding. And his testimony is just absolutely tremendous. We talked about some highs and lows of that and some really horrific moments that Daniel had to experience through those memories. And this time I'm really excited to talk more about the journey to recovery. So
mm,
that's sort of what we're going to be focusing on today are the nuances of what happened after Daniel remembered everything that he expressed in the last video. And we have some really great topics for you guys. So Daniel, I'm really happy that you're here and thought maybe we could start at a moment that every survivor has to contend with, and that's after you remember things about your family that are so horrific that has never been
mm.
talked about. The
Yeah.
natural reaction is to go share that with family and to try to sort of break that ice and ultimately I think everybody wants healing with that choice. You have an incredible story that demonstrates sort of the truth of what happens to many survivors who go through that awakening period and go run to family, the people that they think that they can love and trust. And, I think your story sort of helps root us into the reality of this. So I wanted to pass the mic over to you and share sort of that journey of talking to family and sort of what happened as a result of that after you remembered all of this.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, I'll make a start with that. So for those that have watched the previous interview, I had the first MDMA treatment. I believe I waited until the second MDMA treatment, and then after I'd relived that, I'd had um, other memories that I relived about the death of the girl and other things. And that's when I decided I was going to try and talk to my family about it, my mother, my father, and my brothers, basically. So I was really cautious about thinking, look, this is really traumatic stuff. I don't want to share it with them unless I'm absolutely sure that it's real. After reliving it as vicariously as I did, for those that have seen the footage, it just got to a point when I was like, I can't deny that this has happened any longer. And of course, I need to tell my family. Now, in the beginning, I didn't think my family were involved in any way. I thought it was friends of the family that had gained access to me through trusting relationships. So I felt very protective of my parents and of their emotions and really tried to almost parent them in a way through the whole process. So it began with probably a week or two after the second MDMA treatment, where I reached out to my mother, my father, my two brothers, and I basically showed them the clips that we watched, the short clips in the first interview. I would basically send one clip to them and I asked them to watch it and then delete it. And then we discussed each clip, a bit like we did in the interview, actually. Now, the reason I asked them to delete the clip after we watched it is because I was trying to protect anything to do with the facilitator, basically, and I didn't know how my family would react, so I kind of made them agree to delete things as we watched. Their response initially was a bit befuddled, because we watched the clips and I said, so, what does that look like to you? What does that look? And it was basically like, well, I don't know, Daniel, it just looks strange. And the time we got to the last one, is my sound working okay? Yeah, okay, cool. By the time we got to the last one, I basically disclosed to them and said, look, I've had hours and hours and hours of reliving this now. So I've come to the conclusion of is that this is me reliving being raped. And I'm pretty sure by friends of the family, and it's obviously horrific. And are you okay? So the response I sort of had from all of them really was that this is impossible, or that this couldn't have happened, or that that this isn't real. So my father was very, very strongly saying, look, Daniel, this couldn't have happened. It's impossible. We watched over you really closely. There's no way that anybody could have abused you without your mother and me knowing. Um, my mother was basically saying, well, speak to your father about it. And my brothers were just a bit confused and they got distant and they kind of pulled away, really. I had a few really strange interactions with my mother. We had a series and a to and fro, and it escalated a bit where I ended up leaving a voice message for her saying, look, mum, what's going on? Why aren't you here? Why aren't you here supporting me? Why are you not acting like a mother in this? Why are you just kind of brushing it off? And I left this voice message for her, and I later found out from one of my brothers that she'd actually played that voice message to other family members to try and convince them of how controlling I was. So me saying about delete the videos as you watch them, that was used as reasoning of my controlling nature, apparently. Um, so something that I think we'll talk about is sort of narcissistic and psychopathic kind of behavioral patterns. My father falling in the psychopathic side of things, but my mother falling in the more narcissistic side of things. So yeah, so that was really strange, and I was I was just left with this weird feeling of really all of my family pulling away, my brothers not really having anything to do with me, my mother getting very distant, and then me kind of cutting contact with her when she reached out to all of her side of the family, and I didn't hear anything from any of my parents are divorced now, but I didn't hear anything from my mother's side of the family. So historically, you would have said that we were quite close, that it was quite a close-knit family. So, but nobody reached out to me to see if I was okay, which at the time was immensely confusing. Um, and quite upsetting actually. The feeling I was with is like, why is no one believing me? Why is no one reacting to this? Why is there no belief in me? It's part of these older narratives that I've discovered or that I've become more aware of that have been woven around me my whole life around, oh, Daniel's the crazy one, or Daniel's the unreasonable one, or the broken one, or the yeah, the one that's not quite right, basically, a bit of the black sheep of the family. And my father just kept on. He was the only one that really messaged me regularly. He would message me several times a week, email from Thailand. But his were always really concrete, like, Daniel, nothing ever could have happened. It's impossible. This is some kind of a delusion. Um, and then when he learned that it was MDMA therapy, like, that got used against me a lot because I didn't tell them initially that it was MDMA therapy. I just said it was like a holistic therapy. Um, but that really got used against me as to discredit the body memories that I had recovered. There was a real standout point with my mother when I was reliving stuff from a really young age, and also there was stuff to do with the girl that was murdered. And I remember saying to her, this is before we'd cut contact, I remember saying to her, there was one message I sent where it was like, oh, dear mother, I saw what they did to you. I'm so sorry. I understand why you're so scared. But I'm here and we're safe now. Like, nothing's going to happen. So I sent a really soppy message like that to her. And then probably a couple of days after that, I sent another message saying, like, look, mum, I'm going to be going public with these revelations because somebody died and there was other children being abused. So, like, I really feel like I need to speak out about this. And my mother's response was so strange. It was that, Daniel, you're supposed to protect me, which is really weird,
Yeah,
really
'cause
weird.
it's almost like she's implicating herself instead of wanting to protect the children that you
Mm,
mentioned that
mm,
you wanted to protect. She
yeah,
automatically felt guilty and projected that onto you and
yeah,
felt that guilt automatically of, oh my gosh, I was a part of that. It's going to affect me and he's supposed to
mm,
protect me. He's supposed to protect the family. So they
yeah,
almost kind of give themselves away a lot in these reactions
mm,
that they have, where you would think a parent that actually wasn't involved with this would
mm,
be very supportive and be so curious as to, even if you were delusional or crazy, a parent that loves their child is going to be there for that child, no matter if
mm,
you're an actual child or an adult, your baby's your
yeah,
baby. And so
yeah,
to think about, somebody pushing you away and saying, "Oh, you're crazy," like that, I don't want to
it's
talk to you
weird,
if you're
isn't
going
it?
to be talking about that instead of,
Yeah,
"Oh my gosh, what's going on? You clearly have some type of delusions or hallucinations. Daniel, what's happening? How can I be there for you? Let's get
yeah,
help together. How can I help you navigate this? Let's talk about
yeah,
it." That's like the normal reaction. And it's
yes,
almost interesting because, like I said, they give themselves away, but it's always like the same playbook. Same thing with different therapy methods, like how you said you got
mm,
gaslit about that. If you go to a therapist, an actual clinical therapist that's, certified, has a degree, they'll say, oh, the therapist implanted memories. If you go do hypnosis, they'll say the hypnotist and,
mm,
suggested these things to you. If you do a holistic therapy like MDMA, oh, it's the drugs that are eliciting that. If you're at home by yourself dealing with this and you share that you weren't anywhere getting no type of medication, you were at home, you weren't getting medical help, you were just at home, you don't have a
yeah,
diagnosis, you're obviously crazy. No matter what,
mm,
it's like they find a way to gaslight. It's that typical
yeah,
narcissistic, psychopathic reaction to stuff, not of love and compassion, but of
mm,
taking that possible guilt and shame that they felt automatically from your allegations and throwing it back on you so you retreat back and don't continue your journey.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head there and summarized that beautifully. I I do think it's something I had a conversation with a friend about today, actually, of just this broader dynamic with my mother, this kind of this quite typical narcissistic thing of me as her son being conditioned and trained to be her little husband. So my mother was quite against my father in the family narrative, and um, she was apparently too afraid to leave him and all these kind of things, which I think has some truth in it. But there was a really an enmeshed relationship that we had in which I was there trying to protect her. I was there trying to be this little hero to keep her and my brother safe, when really, obviously, that isn't my responsibility. And I could even understand it to an extent when I was younger. But now, when I'm an adult, she's not married to my father anymore. There's no risk, there's no danger that I'm aware of. She could, she could, in theory, be there. And my imagining was exactly as you said. Like I know how I would react. You know, if I was in that situation as the parent, I would be like, "My God, my darling, what's going on? Like, tell me." And even if I thought it didn't happen, I'd still be like, "Well, look, something's going on. Can we support you with therapy? Can we pay for a good therapist? Can we be there? I'm going to drive down and see you straight away and make sure you're okay, and I'll stay with you as long as needed. You know, my love." Like that would be my response, and I just couldn't understand why I wasn't getting that kind of response from her. Um, so that's kind of the first part of it really, and I had probably about a year without much contact with my family other than my father just emailing me several times a week and us getting really heated. And then, sorry, winding back a bit, um, the memories of my father abusing me came back. So that was 3 months into the treatment. And at that point, I let them know that dad had abused me. I'd called up one of my brothers who had children. So I let him know because I didn't want the children to be at risk. Well, I would have let him know anyway, but that was particularly motivated by that. And, but again, there was this same response of, "This is impossible, Dan." And because I was doing so much healing work and, you know, in some of the processes I was having, it was incredibly tender. Uh, there was there was moments of incredible beauty and grace as well, where I felt spirit was with me, that was holding me and guiding me and watching over me. I was really connecting to myself as a wounded child and what that child needed back then, and also what I needed now, both as the wounded child within me, but also the man who was an abuse survivor. And I really had a strength within me of knowing what I deserved. And sorry, that could probably sound a bit entitled, but
Yeah.
just I know what I would do if the shoe was on the other foot. And I know what the boy that went through everything that he went through that was so horrendous, that was so atrocious, that didn't have anyone to believe him. I've relived stuff where I know now that I tried to disclose to my mother when I was a child. And when I did, she strangled me to, in a panic to try and shut me up. So I've relived memories around that. I've relived other memories of her saying it can possibly be my father, that he's many things, but he's not that. And, you know, I learnt as a child, I did try to disclose, but there was no one there that would believe me. And I knew that as an adult, I deserved to be believed now. And I knew it was safe, or it was safer at least. And based upon that, I started asserting pretty strong boundaries with them, basically, of like, look, I've disclosed to you this abuse. I've disclosed to you my father's involvement, and like your response is absolutely unacceptable. And I was really quite heated. I was very sharp. I was really, you know, saying I was disgusted with them and like how could they react in such a way. And so I guess there was hurt there, but understandably so. Um, but yeah, but I basically cut contact with them, and I didn't have contact with them. And I sent an email to all of them because in the family, there's often ways where everybody talks about each other, but they never really say it directly to their face. So I was like, no, I'm going to communicate everything clearly to everyone at the same time. So I sent like an email to all of them at the same time. And it was like, look, I'm cutting contact. Dad, you're a disgusting piece of shit. And how could you do that? And mum, what's going on, but I love you and my brothers, I love you, and the door will always be open if you ever have memories yourself or you ever find you're able to believe me. Like, I want you to know that, I'll be there and the door will be open. So I left it like that for about a year. And then after a year, I hadn't had any contact from any of them. And I was going through the latest layers of reliving memories. And I found in my journey that as I learnt more and more, that as we're processing memories and we're dealing with layers of memories, there's normally a level of boundary that is needed to be established in order for your healing journey to progress. So when I realized that my family didn't stand by me, I had to establish the boundary that they don't have a place in my life anymore, even though it means giving up on my inheritance from my father, even though it means giving up on love and connection, or so called. Um, but by doing that, it allowed my healing journey to progress, and it allowed things in me to kind of come full circle and to heal and to resolve. And although there was the pain and the loss of losing my so-called family, there was the feeling inside of knowing that I was honoring myself and the child that I once was. And it was hugely restorative, actually. And but anyway, after this year, roughly a year, 10 months to a year, where I hadn't had any contact to them, I was going through something else I can't quite remember now, and I was needing to establish boundaries even more firmly. And I basically said to them, like, look, I haven't even heard from you in 10 months, a year, whatever it is. And you haven't checked in on me. You know that I'm going through it. You know that there's other things going on in my life that are very difficult. Like, actually, on reflection, brothers, like, I really needed you to stand by me in this. Like, I did a lot to protect you as a child for the thanks that I got, the little thanks that I got, as in none. And I protected you when it was unsafe, when we were children, when we were vulnerable. And actually, the door isn't going to be open anymore. Like, I'm cutting contact with you permanently and with finality. Um, because I just knew that even if they came around to it one day, the reality is that when I really needed them, they weren't there. And I wasn't willing to tolerate that. I wasn't willing to allow, like, now I've got a really close knit circle of people, all of who have stuck with me through this process. And it means so much knowing that they believe me, knowing that they were there for the whole journey, including the psychosis, including the delusion, but they stuck by me and they believed in me and they loved me, and they never left my side. So I'm incredibly fortunate to have some good people that I've looked after in life that have looked after me. Um, but my family didn't do that in any way. And I don't have any contact with them anymore. And it's a painful thing sometimes, don't get me wrong. And particularly with my brothers, there can be a heartbreak there sometimes because they're my brothers. I love them, and I gave everything to protect them. And to something I said to them is that actually I was possibly the best older brother you could have wished for, with everything that I went through and did to try and protect you. And I said that to acknowledge myself and to acknowledge what it was that I went through. As more stuff, layers came to the surface, and the abuse I received from my father, my mother's enabling of the abuse effectively, and then also the enmeshed narcissistic mother-child bond that we had, I I guess I realized there was a lot of underlying fear, underlying feelings of fear and of hatred and of disgust actually towards my parents, which is really difficult. Like, it's really difficult to be like, I hate my mother or I hate my father, and even today in the kind of the therapeutic conversation I was having, it came up, and there's really a fear of like, my God, if I say that, what does that make me sound like? Quite a deep child rooted fear. But it's totally reasonable to hate your mother if she's not protecting you from a man who's raping you, and who's, when you try and disclose to her, is at best rubbishing it away, or at worst strangling you and throttling you to shut you up. So or who, when I disclose it to her as an adult, says, "But you're supposed to protect me." Like it's just not on. It's just not on. And I guess the reason I get so fired up about this as well is I know how common this is for survivors. There's often, an enabling parent, there's often an abuser parent, there's often the wider system, the wider family system that turns against them. And this incredible pressure that comes in to not speak out, to not believe in the memories or the flashbacks or the recollections that they're having. And I've spoken to many, many survivors in the last few years, and it's just such a common occurrence. It's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking. And I guess my message to other survivors is, look, it hurts, and often there are things like inheritance or other enmeshing, entrapping tendrils that are kind of in the mix, that are in the dynamic. But for me, there's such a peace, and there's such a peace of mind that comes from just cutting contact with them and not accepting contact because it means that I'm going to receive money or I'm going to receive, you know, some titbit that means that I dishonor myself, and I still have compromised boundaries that let something in from a person that I know is no good for me. So I guess I'm a real advocate for establishing those boundaries. I think it's really hard to do the work to forgive somebody, which is essential in a process of healing, which I didn't believe for a long time, but I do now. But to do that essential forgiveness work, you must establish those boundaries.
I want to acknowledge a couple of things that you had mentioned because they are things that I too see over and over again that I think just aren't talked about enough.
Yeah,
Some of the tendrils that you mentioned, and you see the strategy that goes into keeping these children when they grow up into adults, whether they remember or not, in the cult still, in the system, in the
yeah,
network, in the family. And you see that a lot with the carrot hanging over the victim turned survivor's head really ever since they're children, before you even have memories, you're going to get an inheritance one day. And so you have that connection that's been drilled into you, that's been implanted and told to you over and over and over again. And so that's a really hard thing for one to walk away from. A lot of survivors get stripped of finances, resources. Sometimes the family can get them fired from their jobs and keep them from being employed again. This can often lead to things like homelessness or having to couch surf and
hmm
to, I guess seem crazy, from people on the outside because you lose everything and then they gaslight you and say, oh, well, it's because they're
yeah,
crazy. They can't keep a job, they can't do this. And so you see how, how sort of deep this goes as far as the strategy put with something just as simple as an inheritance and how something like that can be so hard to walk away from, and they expect it to be really hard to walk away from, and they
yeah,
expect that to be a carrot that they can still dangle that you'll come running towards and say,
yeah,
okay, well, I know all of this happened, but I really want this, and it really bothers these families when, they are offering you all these
mm,
things that they think you are going to find glimmery and shiny, and you're just going to forget about everything else and run towards it.
yeah,
And you see how, that can be held against somebody and held above a victim's head who remembers, they threaten with things like that. I wanted to acknowledge that. And then also the being called crazy. Obviously,
mm,
that's something that could potentially be easy to do if all of a sudden a family member is coming forward and saying things that they never have. That can be a thing that they tell people, well, Daniel's just gone
mm,
crazy. That's why he's
yeah,
saying that we abused him. But you see, even in your story, how it wasn't just set up for you where they decided to call you that as an adult remembering. They picked out that you were rebellious as a child, started that early in anticipation
mm,
that one day you might rebel. Daniel's the crazy kid. He's the rebellious one. He's the one that doesn't follow the rules. He's the disobedient child. And so you
mm,
see even how like from far back, like the intelligence that goes into this type of abuse, this organized abuse, that it's not just random. It's very carefully put together where they
mm,
can pick out personality types even and start priming people around the child already to think that they're crazy or rebellious from a young age. So then once you do get older and you remember, it's really easy
mm,
for them to bring that crazy card back out. And then it reminds people, oh yeah, I guess they have said Daniel's been rebellious and he's been a liar and he's been the trouble
mm.
kid ever since he was little. So I'm going to believe the family because Daniel's always been like that. It's just how Daniel is, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so you see like these patterns, and it's just so absolutely horrifying to me to think of all the strategy and the work that goes on sort of behind the scenes to prime the child in
Mm,
so many ways to stay even after they remember. And like what a miracle it is that somebody like you can remember and completely separate yourself from all of it, the inheritance, the possible family relationships, everything that you knew as a family, as a child, to be able to just completely separate yourself from that, I think is just such a miracle and just such an act of healing, to be
mm,
able to understand how toxic that is for you and that that's not love, and to recognize all the manipulation that went into building sort of that manufactured family that you grew up in, and those manufactured
mm,
memories of everything being perfect, to try to conceal the abuse. And I just wanted to acknowledge those couple of things because I really do see them come up a lot, and you see how they prime the child and then the people around the child in anticipation,
yeah.
for maybe 20, 30 years down the road, what could happen. They're already planned and ready to go, and they've known sort of a strategy ever since you were a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of points I'll touch on that actually is, there is a truth, unfortunately, that I was a damaged child. I was a damaged young man. I did act out in ways. And, as an example, something, one of the ways that I survived the abuse and I survived not turning into my father is that I had a very, very deep, I've had to do a lot of work around. I had a really deep commitment that I would never promise to myself that I would never be anything like my father. That's caused me a lot of problems in life because there's areas in life that he's actually quite competent and quite proficient. So, but anything that was like him, I was like, I'm not going to be like that. And I failed at school on purpose to kind of punish him. I really made my life difficult in many ways in the upholding of that promise. But that promise in the dark hours of the night when he was raping and abusing me and was trying to make me his dutiful son and trying to get me to abuse my younger brother, that promise held true and was something, a light, a torch I could hold that kept the darkness from fully engulfing me. So that's one thing that I wanted to say is, but just as an example with my mother, one of the things she would say, and this is something that narcissists are very good at doing, is they're very good at figuring out what your most tender, most wounded, most vulnerable spot is, and they're able to poke at it. So my mother used to say to me, "You're just like your father." And that would have a catastrophic kind of response in me. In my teenage years, I would often headbutt or punch a door, or I'd storm off, or kind of scream out in pain. And at the time, I didn't really know why I was responding so strongly, but I would have a really strong response to it. And I remember one time in particular in the kitchen, after my parents got divorced, and my mum said it to me. And I remember looking and seeing this glint of glee in my mum's eye after she'd said it. I caught it. I really saw it. But she would say that when I was younger as a means of controlling and of, oh, you're just like your father, Daniel. Stop behaving like that. It was really a horrible control mechanism that she had, but it was also something she could do to provoke me, to get a reaction out of me, so she could say to people, look what he's like. He's so unreasonable. He's so over the top. Um, but and you're absolutely right. There's been so many narratives that have been woven about me over the years, and it's not based on people's direct relationships with me. There's things that people would say, which looking back on it is like, that hasn't come from me. That's come from something my mother has said, and I've seen that. Yeah, there's examples I won't give actually, but just, and this is part of the reason it's been so easy, relatively speaking, to let go of my family because they all believe these lies. They all believe this narrative against me. Like the people that actually know me and get me is even if I might have got a bit deluded at one point, I'm actually a very integrous and very principled person. And it doesn't mean that I get everything right. And it doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes, but my intentions are good and my intentions are pure. And to be seen so opposite to that in every way and oh Dan, because it's like the narrative is like, oh, he's just doing it for attention, he just wants to be special, he just wants sympathy from people. And it's like, guys, there's easier ways to get attention. Do you know what I mean? Like I could I could make a gaming YouTube channel or something and I could stream my favorite game or something. Do you know what I mean? Like there's loads of ways, or I could try and do something on relationships, or I don't even know what, but it's like I want to get attention by posting videos online about me reliving being raped as a child, where that gives me like suicidal, like overwhelming feelings of fear and of disgust and of failure and of, like how's that how's that me doing it for attention? I don't I, in some ways it's like the narrative is so juxtaposed to who I actually am for people to believe in that, to believe in those narratives against me, people that have known me firsthand, well, then actually it makes it quite easy to let go of them because there's plenty of people that have known me that haven't bought into those narratives as well. And I'm so, so grateful for those people because I think this gaslighting, this smear campaign, this black sheep of the family kind of dynamic is so, and not being believed is almost as bad as the trauma itself. In some ways, it's worse. In some ways, it compounds it. And survivors have to deal with this so thoroughly. It's really heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking. If the family could step in and just be a normal family, if the tribe could gather round when these memories come back and could hold and can protect and can soothe, well, then the pain can get processed and can get released and can get integrated. But it just tightens the mechanisms. It just tightens the constriction and the resistance to life that can be such a part of being a survivor. So it's heartbreaking, man. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
It is, and you really do. You see that over and over and over again, where there's
Mm,
that constriction of the family, and I think everybody's wish is when you do go back to the family, is that they'll embrace you and that they'll commit to repenting and sharing the truth and apologizing and doing everything that they can to help, like you said, soothe those wounds and to become a family again and to get all of that to sort of, air it all out and put it all on the table. And the reactions are just so backwards. But that's really the difference between somebody who's a psychopath and not, is somebody
mm,
who's not can't relate to that. It's just such
yeah.
an abnormal reaction. The problem is the reaction looks normal to society because the psychopathy started so long ago. They've primed the people around the child and the family
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
sort of have a control mechanism for when something defaults down the line with
Mm,
the adult, once they remember, once they rebel, once they start speaking out. And so that's the problem is they're
yeah.
so like psychopaths, they're psychos, but they're not dumb. They have to try really hard to maintain that psychopathy because they have that cover story. And so they have to keep their T's crossed and their I's dotted always, and they have to be 10 steps ahead of whatever happens. And usually they are, and that's the problem. So it's really hard for these victims, especially because they are stripped of things that society looks at as respectful, such as maybe an inheritance, maybe the family takes their job away, maybe the family gets them evicted from their home or shuts off their bank accounts. And now all of a sudden the person physically from the outside too from people looks like they're struggling when in fact they're being even more manipulated behind the scenes and they're having everything that could possibly help them get justice taken away. And so the things that society looks at somebody as doing well, or from a perception of a visual perception, when those things are
Mm,
taken away, the family, nothing's changed in the actual family. It's really easy to just gaslight, like you said. I love that word, gaslight. It's such a powerful word that, again, we don't really learn about what that is until it's happening to us, and it's like, oh, that's what that is. I had a podcast guest. He was a Catholic school abuse survivor, and he called this the abused of the abused. So essentially, you're an abuse survivor, you go and share with society or your family what's happening, and you get abused once again. And like you
yeah,
said, it can be almost
yeah,
more traumatizing sometimes than the
really,
initial abuse that you're trying to disclose, because it's compiling. Like, you have this entire life stories that you're remembering, and then all of a sudden now you're getting abused again. You're getting gaslit, and you're getting discredited. You're getting called all these different names and terms that have nothing to do with who you are. You have people that should stand in your corner turning away from you. You feel very misunderstood, and it's very, very sad. And you see why a lot of survivors and victims end up going back, and that's the more
mm,
sad part, is they
yeah,
leave. It's very, very hard to stay away unless you somehow have, a stable career set up, you have that integrity, you have, some character development, or at least just some personal development under your belt, where you've sort of healed from some of that shame and guilt and have been able to contend with some of that, instead of letting them re-traumatize you and make you feel that again. So you go back out of that loyalty just like how you would have before.
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people go back, and a lot of people end up taking their life.
Yes.
Um, a couple of points that just came up while you were speaking there. So with my mother, I don't know how premeditated her behavior was. It just seems more this narcissistic, but that seems like psychopathic in ways. But my father was very much, from what I've relived, very considered, very forward thinking, very strategic, and horrifyingly so, and quite a very compelling, almost I'm innocent. Um, I didn't even know about these things, Daniel, kind of persona that is his fault. They're very good at having a false persona, psychopaths and narcissists, I think, where they present themselves to the world, where they're very good at pretending to be compassionate, or they know what it looks like. But behind closed doors, there's something completely different. And that's really where the mask comes off. And that as well is a huge thing for survivors, that it makes repression of memories so widespread and makes it so hard to integrate and to believe yourself when the memories do come back, because there's this something happens in childhood where we can't hold the reality that our parent is both wicked but also that they're good sometimes. So that creates a real dual tension. And the child, being the child, what they normally do is they just disappear, they forget. And sophisticated pedophiles are very good at creating a split in the psyche of a victim, because they know that there's a natural movement towards wanting to forget. They see the goodness in their parent abuser, um, and then they often internalize the wrongness, the shame, the pain, and make that about themselves, because on a very deep primal level, for a child in the wild is so dependent upon its caregivers for survival, that to have no caregivers or to have bad caregivers is equivalent to annihilation. So there's very deep programming to that sophisticated predators are very good at utilizing to create splits in the psyche, to create repressed memories. And, they say that a child that's abused before the age of 8 has a high likelihood that they're going to end up repressing memories. And there's an article on my website about pedophiles no disassociation to you. And that highlights it brilliantly, how they go about strategically invoking disassociation in their victims, which is horrific. I never knew before my memories came back that you could intentionally invoke dissociation in a victim. I mean, it's mind boggling. And most people are just absolutely blind to this. Um, which again makes it even more difficult to be believed. And just on the subject of being believed, we'll talk about it a bit later, but unfortunately, that was a large part of my experience in the mental health system after I got arrested and then transferred to hospital of just, it was really difficult, man. It was really difficult. And just, I wish there was more support for survivors. And that's why what you're doing, Emma, and people like you or like me or like others is just so important because the more that this topic gets known about, the more it's spoken about, the more the little ins and outs of and details of things are discussed, then the less alone hopefully somebody feels when the memories do come back to them, when they are in that incredibly vulnerable period of time where their whole life is seemingly falling apart. And as you say, they're losing everything. You know, like I lost everything. I lost my home. I lost everything, and I ended up homeless. Ended up living in my car, which actually I really enjoyed for a while. I really enjoyed until I really enjoyed the sense of freedom that I had. And you know, from the military, I'm used to sleeping a bit rough. So curled up in the back of a state car, of a family car, was quite cozy actually, and I had some wonderful adventures with it. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, and losing your community, losing your family, losing friends, along with dealing with the reality of these body flashback, these memories. It's, you know, in the last 4 years, I've lost so much. It's sometimes I'm just a bit in shock about it, really. In other ways, I'm absolutely okay. But it's big, man. It's really, there's a good reason that, as you said, survivors end up going back to their family, you know.
100%. And to go along with that, I do want to talk about your experiences in the medical system
Yeah,
and elsewhere, because I think there's a lot of valuable
yeah.
lessons that, survivors can take away from that. But you mentioned another really important point that also does not get talked about that has become kind of a personal passion of mine to talk more about, which is the self-destruct programming and suicidal ideation.
Mm,
Unfortunately, that can go off really easily with survivors, whether it's through mind control or just the overwhelming disparity of not being met with support as they're going through traumas that are just so heinous, the worst crimes against humanity ever committed,
yeah.
and they're met with no support, no resources, often going
Mm,
homeless, and I wanted
mm,
to just hear you share how you overcame that with yourself, because unfortunately, I think that gets overwritten that again,
mm,
somebody went crazy and committed suicide, not realizing the depth of why sometimes this happens within our community to survivors. So I wanted to get your take on that.
mm. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, that's a really important topic. Yeah, where to start with that? I mean, I've really been beset by, well, firstly, I'm going to say I'm not at risk in any way. I'm not going to self-delete. I'm not at risk, but I have definitely suffered through my life with very strong suicidal urges or suicidal images, like images in my mind. When the memories came back, it got even worse. Um, I still have a program running that sometimes I just have this Tourette's-like outburst that says, I deserve to die, I deserve to die, which is to do with conditioning that I received at the hands of my abusers, and also just due to overwhelm and guilt around the death of the girl and a whole constellation of other things. But there's a really deep-seated belief in me deserving to die, which I did work on today. You know, it's something I'm working on, but it's just something that's very deeply embedded. Um, and you know, I mean, I can experience fairly regularly flashbacks or images of suicide, and I know the reason I'm not at risk is that I know enough to, and I've known for a long time not to listen to it, and I've known to just let it pass like a storm. And I think I think some people can identify with it, and because they take it as something literal or as something true or something about them, that it's very easy to then get caught up in it. Um, I've I've had a couple of moments where I would in a couple of years ago where I would say I was at risk, where it was really close and it nearly rose up and possessed me. In the closing ceremony of the special party and after the murder of the girl, in the conditioning there, they conditioned me to believe that it was my fault that she died, that it was me that had actually killed her, that I was so dirty and so broken that I didn't even deserve death. Um, so there's been very, very strong conditioning that I've been through. But really, my advice to people is, and this is where um, awareness, meditation, body-based meditation, and being able to ground yourself in the sensations of your own body and to get more distance from your thoughts, to be able to, if you have the thought of, let's say this is the thought of suicide, to be able to look at it and to feel that there's that distance, or to just recognize it for what it is and to let it pass, to know that it's going to pass and it will pass if you can just hold on, try and ground yourself in your body, try and do something else, try and distract yourself. But whatever you do, dear, dear, dear survivor, do not let that possess you, because it's almost like a black magic spell. It feels like, and it's something that can rise up and just take hold of you and make you do something that you're not supposed to do, and it's a tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy if you if that defeats you, you know.
It's gotten to the point now where every time I hear anywhere that this person committed suicide or this person,
Mm,
society has one perception of it, that that person made a choice and sat there and thought about it. And it's not
mm,
in the conscious minds of most people that that could have been a program running, that that could have been
mm,
something that they genuinely in that moment didn't really have a choice on because they didn't know
mm.
that was put in them, you know,
Yeah,
that it was a fail-safe method from the family to, prevent that person from continuing to disclose if
yeah.
they started to. And it's just such a shame because you look at all these
Mm,
people who passed and their stories never got acknowledged for what actually happened to them. And I think it's just
yeah.
such an important topic because a lot of survivors that don't know what programming is, that don't know what this conditioning is, that it's so
Mm,
new to them, they don't have the awareness of what could happen to them, and I just really
mm,
appreciate your vulnerability to be able to talk about
mm.
that, because
Thank
these
you.
conversations could genuinely save lives.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to make really clear of like, look, it gets conditioned into me or into other victims, other survivors very strongly of, look, if you tell people what happened, we're going to kill you. If you tell people what happened, you're going to kill yourself. If you're, it really gets embedded. It can be the programming and the conditioning can get done while you're being raped, which makes it even more just pervasive. So exactly as you say, Emma, it's a very, very serious topic. It is, you need to think of it as a computer program in the computer system, or almost like a black magic spell, or it can be useful to think of it in that way so that you can see it for what it is, so it doesn't take possession of you. And so you can just have enough awareness to observe it, to let it pass, and to breathe through it, to ground yourself through it. But whatever you do, don't, please, I beg you, don't listen to it. Don't listen to it. It is, you're a precious thing, and what happened was never, never meant to happen to you. It is an abomination what survivors suffer, and to then end up taking your own life for very understandable reasons. And it could even just be, as you said, just the pain and the overwhelm and the from being made homeless and from losing your family and losing your community. Like that is enough, just the pain to drive you to it. Never mind the conditioning and the programming that is on top of that or beneath that. Um, but I beg you, any survivor that watches this, just please, Yeah, please don't. Please don't.
And to sort of go along with that, Daniel, how did you start learning about having a system in parts and helping navigate that within yourself?
Mm,
Because that's a really difficult thing too. If somebody has never even heard of that existing or is just sort of used to that being the way that they are, and they think everybody, has
mm,
these different voices that might speak to them or, feel a little bit disconnected with their memories. That can be a really difficult thing for somebody to navigate. I know even for me, just learning about it through just reading and listening has been so hard to understand. I couldn't imagine
yeah.
doing it in a moment of such disparity when you're being, just pummeled with all these memories of everything. So I want to see how you navigated that part of your
Wow.
health.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. So my study before the memories came back, so I recommend anyone to start studying up on this now, before the memories come back, um, is a good basis in somatic therapy, somatic experiencing, and somatic bodily awareness in a therapeutic way. I think the more you can learn about the body and the more you can learn about trauma, as in the way that Peter Levine talks about it in Waking the Tiger and other books that he's written, I think that is just provides a really solid grounding. And it also provides a grounding in the wisdom of the body, and it makes us a bit less dependent on the mind, on the brain, on our conscious mind. Um, a bit of work I would recommend doing around child parts. I can't think of an author off the top of my head, but just something around working with parts and working with your child self. So in some of the other spiritual work that we'd done like child regressive kind of therapy before my memories came back. So I had some framework in place. I'd also done some work with dreams and had some really powerful dreams when I was doing a storytelling and mythology course. And I started having these really vivid dreams that I could then start controlling. So I started almost lucid dreaming with them. And that had some very strong themes around my childhood and allowed me to start identifying different parts of myself. And, I think some people have got really separate parts. My parts are not fully separate. They're kind of cohesive and partly from the work I've done. Some of them are still very much in the shadow. But, as I said in the last interview, there's Dan, there's who's kind of marine mode, go getter, take no bullshit kind of mode. There's uh, Danny, which my father would sickeningly call me in like a lover type way sometimes. There's Daniel, which is the more integrated, the more wholesome adult part of myself. Um, there's Wolf. There's other aspects of me too. Um, which I won't say just out of respect of them. So it's really important when you start doing work on parts that you start having a conversation with them, you start listening to them, you start finding out what it is that they need. Sometimes what they need is in conflict with what another part needs. So you really need to work on an adult part of yourself that is able to hold and protect and cherish and love and support all of these parts. So that's for me what Daniel is really. But yeah, in my memories, I could just tell if I was in a more submissive mode with my father. I just knew that was more Danny. That was more the Danny part of myself was there. And by fracturing and having these different aspects of our personality, it allows us to compartmentalize the suffering that we're going under, and it allows something at the core of us to remain untouched and to remain safe. So it's an incredible wisdom that causes the fracturing of the mind and the fracturing of personality into parts. So, and they can be worked with beautifully. It's beautiful work if when you start doing the work. It's challenging and it's confronting, and you'll have a part that holds the pain, you'll have a part that holds the shame, you'll have a part that holds the rage and the anger. So it's not easy. It's not easy work, but just coming to see and coming to love and coming to embrace these different aspects of yourself and starting to coalesce and gradually reform into a whole human being is such a full, heartening process. I'm grateful for it in a way. I'm grateful for it. I'm not grateful for what happened, obviously, but just I'm so grateful I've been able to go through that and regain myself to whatever extent. Um,
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's another thing that can be very hindering to survivors is trying to learn so much at once, both about your memories and trying to figure all that out, what your life actually was versus what you thought it
mm,
was forever. And
mm,
then trying to figure out who you are on the inside too. You have the whole outside life you're trying to construct, and then
yeah.
figuring that out inside, especially when you're not being continually handled and programmed and manipulated and conditioned, and now
Mm,
you're free. Now, these parts, they're not, they're not, they don't have the strings attached to them anymore. And so there's
mm,
a lot more chaos inside trying to find cohesion with that, and especially whenever they start sharing memories. So I think it's a really important part of these testimonies and of this information that not just for survivors, but therapists need to know this,
yeah.
counselors need to know this, um, you know, people that work in churches, any place where a survivor might go for safety, that could be going through extreme trauma. We need to have more trauma-informed people out there ready to receive them with open arms instead of saying,
Mm,
"Oh, you're crazy," or "What do you mean
mm,
you have multiple personality disorder? You need to go check into a psychiatrist's office or a hospital, not come to my church." And we just have such a really poor understanding of how our body
mm,
operates under extreme stress and trauma, but it makes perfect sense when you actually hear it from people who have gone through the healing and who continue to go through it and learn about it. It really is a beautiful miracle that we have that within us, that our bodies can do such supernatural things to survive and endure things that would ultimately kill us otherwise, and I love how far you've come in your journey. Nobody would ever guess talking to you like that you've went through such hard things as a child and that you've overcome so many hard things as an adult. And it's really a testament to this work that you've done almost before you even knew that you needed to do it. That's why I
mm,
love your advice too on starting to heal, even if you don't have memories, to just go through some type of
yeah.
healing and to start taking care of yourself just as a human and of love of yourself,
Mm,
especially to prevent if something ever does come through where you're like, oh, something, I just remembered something
mm,
really bad and I didn't know that I went through it. I think the precaution and prevention work is a beautiful way to care for yourself no matter who you are. Survivor, maybe you think you might be, or if you're just a person, you didn't go through anything hard. We should all be doing these things and taking care of ourselves. We have a lot to learn from survivors just on self-care even. So I appreciate you sharing all of that.
So yeah, I think it's okay for me to talk about Danny a little bit, if that's okay. And this is just to really try and highlight just the wisdom and how this compartmentalization process worked. That's okay? Yeah. So, so look, there was times like my so-called father was sickeningly loving to me at times, and he was sickeningly, um, I guess, in his fucking energy with me sometimes. Um, and I couldn't fight everything. I wasn't strong enough to resist everything. There was times when I needed to submit, and there was times where I basically needed to take it. And that's, for example, where Danny was very good at just holding that and being the receptive part of me that just had to lie down and just had to take this, humiliating and heartbreaking and just shameful, terrible thing that was done to me. But so I have a lot of compassion and a lot of love for Danny. For when I first started seeing him, it was quite difficult because it's very easy for another part of me to have judgment about how weak he was or how he should have fought harder, for example. But that was the part of me that fought, and there was times that I could fight. There was times that I had to submit, and there is this incredible wisdom in our nervous system. And I'll say this to any survivor, like how we act is often done in the highest intelligence with the impossible situations and circumstances that we are given with at any particular time. So we navigate it in such a way that allows us to retain as much integrity while retaining as whole as we possibly can, even if it means that we've done terrible things. It just means there was no other choice. So that, like I'm incredibly grateful for Danny and the other parts of me. And yeah, I just wanted to say about Danny really, and the interplay between parts where, another part will be judging that and be, I've had parts that have been really quite harsh towards Danny. Um, and I've really struggled with it in ways, but I feel in such a good place with it now where I can really see and acknowledge, like I can really acknowledge that without Danny, I wouldn't have survived, as you said. Like I needed him to get through this and to get through the times where it was simply impossible or it was too tiring to fight. And I just had to put up with it, basically. Yeah,
And thank you for sharing that part too. That's a really important thing for survivors to know that there will be conflicting parts, that
yeah,
these parts were created in a sense to fulfill certain roles. And so they weren't out and about participating in school and in real life or in combat or in these abuse situations. They were typically there for one type of situation. That's all that they
mm,
know. And so
yeah,
obviously if you have a part that's maybe combat trained or martial arts trained and that's their job is to fight or to be the protector, and then you
yeah,
have sort of this other part that was their role was to be that more submissive and
mm,
to not fight, to be that part that can sit there in strength and
yeah,
protect the body by not fighting and being able to endure that horrible torture and pain, and
mm,
I
mm,
appreciate you for honoring all of that, and all of us honor all of you too, because without all of those parts, you wouldn't be here today. They all
exactly.
protected you, no matter what their different role was, whether it was more of an outward fighter part or the part that had to fight internally and find that strength to be able to endure things, that
Mm,
that could have destroyed you, So I want to honor those parts too. And part that you brought up briefly last time, and maybe we could segue here instead of kind of the healthcare, but Wolf too
mm,
has played a big role in your life. And, at one point too, you contending with that part, even you sort of met and had this clash with the law because
mm.
did you want to talk about that a little bit
Yeah,
also?
yeah,
That's
let's
kind of
talk
like a
about that.
different
Yeah.
type of part that you were sort of learning to become cohesive with.
Yeah, so Wolf is yeah, I love Wolf and I love talking about Wolf. And it leads quite nicely into delusion and it leads quite nicely into the police and that kind of thing. So yeah, in the beginning with Wolf, where is he? God bless you. God
Hey.
bless you, mate. um I was always a bit in awe of him. He was he would warn me. I think I said in the other interview that he was either a part of me, some fractured, wild, primordial, ancestral, just fractured part of my psyche, or he was some kind of protective wild spirit that was sent to protect me from a very young age. But let's call him apart for now for the ease of the conversation. So yeah, Wolf would warn me sometimes what was going on and what was going to happen, and he would let me know. He was so sharp at seeing through the bullshit of my abusers. And they're just saying this, Daniel, because they want you to do X, Y, Z. So don't believe it. Don't. So I've had layers of memories where I'm reliving it. I'm reliving being raped. And then I'm just like, I've got like Wolf in my ear saying, like, yeah, don't listen to their bullshit, basically. And so he is amazing and he's fought for me. He's held a lot of the anger and a lot of the rage and but a lot of tenderness as well, actually. Like he's such a beautiful part. He's such a beautiful part. But one thing that happened in my story is I think Wolf kind of rose up and started to possess me a bit. And because something that Wolf had spoken all the way back when that girl had been murdered, there was a part where he had come up and he had said to them, like, don't kill this girl, don't do what you're going to do. You're like children playing in the dark with things that you don't understand. Don't break this sacred law. Don't break this sacred law. And this law is that the blood of the innocent shall not be defiled. The blood of the innocent shall not be defiled. And it is an incredibly old, incredibly ancient law, apparently, or so my deluded mind, or so it genuinely is. But Wolf started to rise up and possess me. And unfortunately, as I separated from my family, as I separated from my father, and as I became homeless in particular, I was becoming gradually increasingly delusional. And part of that was ideas of grandiosity. Part of that was ideas of me being possessed by Wolf, of me even being able to transform into Wolf. So this happened really gradually. But I started to believe that there was a holy war that was coming, and that in this holy war, there would be the hunting down and the persecution of every paedophile in the world. There would be a war against the darkness, against the great darkness that is here, that is feeding off the suffering of the pain of the innocent. Um, yeah, so it started to get really intense and really overwhelming and really all-consuming. And I really thought, I mean, it's embarrassing to say, but I developed a bit of which again is quite common actually, but I developed a bit of a Christ complex, and I thought I was here as the Christ reborn, embarrassing as it is to say, and that I was here to save the world. Um, and I've relived memories where there's ritualistic stuff that's going on where you're being made to believe that you're Christ-like, or that you're an incredibly gifted child that they're choosing and that they're trying to raise up, and all these kind of things. So it kind of makes sense how I got there, but it's a bit embarrassing talking about it. But I don't. It's quite common among abuse survivors to slip into psychosis and to slip into that kind of delusion. Unfortunately, there is other stuff that went on with my story, by the way. So if anyone is aware of that, or anyone was watching my videos at the time, there's just some things I'm not legally allowed to talk about. So there's stuff I'm consciously not discussing for legal reasons. But um, the heart of it is that I started to prepare myself for waging a war against paedophiles, and that led to me one sunny day, going for a walk. I had a war dance that I would do, which was me on the beach, and normally it was just me with a stick or barehanded doing like a martial arts dance with music on, a martial arts dance and shadow boxing kind of frenzy. But one day I went out, and I went out armed with weapons, basically, and I went out to have a confrontation with the police. I believed that in this confrontation with the police that I would transform into Wolf. So he'd really risen up and possessed me. And I didn't, looking back on it in this progressment that I had into delusion, is I lost my attachment to my critical mind. And what I found was happening was, when I was reliving memories, my mind had more and more taken over, trying to make sense of what had happened, and it had started forming its own narrative around it and coming up with a fantastical story about what had happened, including me believing the stuff about me being Wolf and me being able to transform into Wolf. So I went out one day armed with a spear, with a sword, with a knife, and with an axe, and I basically walked around the coastal path in the wild. But I knew the police would be called, and I was there to have a standoff with them. I wasn't planning on hurting anyone, but I did believe that in my hour of greatest need, that Wolf would rise up and possess me, and that I would be transformed, and thus the holy war would begin. That I would be able to start persecuting paedophiles, and I would be able to start ensuring that children would be safe. So that's quite a lot.
Yeah, I did want to make a comment on the, I don't even know what you call it, Jesus programming, God programming, Christ
Yeah,
programming. That
yeah,
is something a lot of survivors go through, and I think they do feel very embarrassed by it. And
yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that because I've actually even seen this with a couple celebrities, one being a professional boxer online came out
right,
and people called him psychotic after he had this episode, but he came online actually and started saying, I'm Jesus, I'm going to do all this, and I'm going to take down the pedophiles, and I'm God,
yeah,
and you see it, you see this sort of play out sometimes with
yeah,
Kanye West is another celebrity who started saying that
mm,
he's, Christ reborn. And it's really easy to label people when they come out and say things like this.
mm,
But when you actually see the mechanism behind it, that this was a part of programming, I mean, there's so many layers to it to turn you away from religion, to turn you away from God, to invert
yeah,
Christianity and the Bible. But there's also the end of they program some of this to come out first when you first start remembering. And so when you're coming out and you're remembering all of this, and some of your first thoughts are, oh my gosh, I'm God reborn, I'm Jesus, I'm this person, I'm God. A lot of times survivors vocalize that to people because it's sort of like this impulsive thing, like
mm, mm,
it's all consuming in that moment. And then that's another way people can say that you're crazy. And so they know
totally.
that, so there's different methods and strategies why they do this. But I appreciate you talking about that because it actually is more common than I think is
Mm,
talked about. And I've
yeah,
seen a lot of examples of it through the testimonies on my channel. I've seen it, like I said, online and, sort of in the public sphere space of people who, may have had programming themselves and it sort of cracked and broke on the internet. But I think it's really important that we sort of have these conversations and talk about it more because you shouldn't feel guilt and shame with that. It shows that the mechanisms worked how they were supposed to and that you were able to overcome them and
mm,
and combat it, and it didn't overcome you, it didn't ruin your life. It might have caused some setbacks and there might have been some
mm,
things that you went through to overcome it. But I think the more we talk about it, the easier it can be for somebody, like you said, to maybe when it happens, to look at it
yeah,
like the self-destruct programming stuff that comes up and to be able to separate yourself from it and say, oh, this is programming, this is conditioning, this is something
yeah.
that, I don't have to react to in the way that I feel my body wants to. I can look at it, logically know what it is, and start to work through it and stay grounded through that process.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you. That helps settle my kind of embarrassment with it. But you're absolutely right. It needs to be discussed. It is actually a frighteningly common phenomena and is often a sign of abuse, of serious abuse. And yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Emma. That's really, yeah.
You're welcome. And so you went to the beach, you had these weapons, you were sort of living out what you would maybe say are more delusional thoughts, even though we know it's conditioning. It's stuff that you were
Mm,
probably conditioned to have internally, and now you're enacting it externally, which again,
yeah,
it's working exactly as it's supposed to. But unfortunately, you did have a run-in with the cops.
I did.
And I think this is another important pivotal moment in your story, because even though there was sort of this breakdown where you're going through this, and contending with, again, cohesion, like you're still working with your parts in these moments, even though it might
Mm,
feel very contentious and you can look back and say, oh my gosh, that was embarrassing. This was a big
yeah.
moment of healing almost for you. But I'd love to hear kind of what happened after that, and obviously your journey going through some of the
Mm,
repercussions of this, and maybe some
yeah.
lessons that you've learned.
Yeah, got you. Yeah, well, I'll talk you through what happened with the police first, if that's okay. And
Yeah.
so so yeah, I was up on the headland basically, and there was a helicopter that came out. The armed police came out and basically encircled me, and I didn't have the weapon in my hand at the time, but we ended up having a standoff that lasted for about 5 hours. In that time, I was talking about everything that was going on. I was talking about how corrupt the world is and how broken it is. They had a negotiator there that was trying to talk me down. Um, from my military experience, I kind of knew what the the standard operating procedures of the police roughly would be. So I had a sense of how it would go. And I knew because I wasn't going to back down that force would be used against me at some point. And I was waiting for that point to trigger Wolf that would rise up and protect me and finally be free. Um, so what actually happened is they ended up uh, tasering me 3 times. I remember, yeah, I got the first shot that I got. I kind of went funny. I made a strange noise and I fell over backwards and banged my head. So not quite the glorious revolution I was envisioning. Um, but yeah, and then they tasered me twice initially. That dropped me. But when I was on the floor, I was still, they all came around me and put their hands on me. And I was still resisting them then. And they were still tasering me with the tasers that were attached to me. But then they kind of managed to get a taser in the base of my spine and they tasered me there. And I remember feeling this incredible shockwave of energy going up my spine into my head. And I was just having these almost like these mushroom clouds in my head of just blossoming electricity. It was really, yeah, it was really quite strong. So that kind of wiped me out really. And that, I guess I wouldn't say it took the fight out of me. It just incapacitated me basically. So something that I got from that situation is that I'd relived being tortured. I'd relived even being electrocuted. I'd relived, horrific and brutal rapes. And in the reliving of that, I had experienced myself at times as being very strong and very resistant to pain. And something that I got from that is like, I didn't actually give in to the pain there. Like it did end up incapacitating me, but while I was able to, I was still fighting through it. And there was something, even in the madness of everything that was going on, in the busyness of that moment, I was able to take some small measure of reassurance of like, I didn't give in to the pain. And that kind of echoed out with the other moments that I'd relived. And I think I really took something from that actually of like, yeah, maybe I didn't make all of that up. Maybe I was able to resist in the way that I've relived. So that was pretty big. They took me to the police station. They processed me. I stayed in the cells for a couple of days and then went to court one morning at the magistrates. And then I was taken to Bristol prison. Um, I spent in total probably about 2 months in prison. And to be honest, uh, it was it was fine. I had quite a good time in my own way. I was still quite strong with my delusions, so I was incredibly positive and resourced. And like in the exercise yard, for example, I'd kind of strip. I'd just be in a pair of shorts, running around barefoot, doing pull-ups and press-ups, and kind of cheering on the lads that were there. And I felt a huge amount of compassion for my fellow prisoners actually, and a lot of stories because I was deemed to have mental health issues. I was locked up in single cells on a particular wing with a lot of guys that were in for murder. Um, but a lot of these murder, there was one guy that was in for killing a paedophile that had abused his daughter, for example. There was another guy who had blacked out while he was drinking and had ended up murdering a friend. But you, you could tell he was this beautiful guy. They're like really the amount of tragic stories and the amount of people reacting to abuse or the amount of bad circumstances leading to people ending up in there. Like, don't get me wrong, there were genuine bad apples. There was really, but most people, I would say, there was some kind of tragedy to their story. Some were just, I'm not saying it was all roses and rainbows. There were some people that I felt cautious of. But generally, I found people to be really good and really decent. And there was really a code of honor among prisoners. If anybody, because the prison guards would tend to let slip what people were in for. So sex offenders, pedophiles and people that have normally had like a serious offences against women are normally put on a protected wing because there's such a code of honor among prisoners that they will go for anyone that's done any of those things, and they'll try and physically harm them, try and kill them. If anyone's laid a hand on a woman, if anyone's sexual abusers especially, they're not safe in the general prison population. So I had a lot of time. I had a lot of time for my fellow prisoners and felt a lot of love for the guys actually, and felt a lot of heartbreak for. I don't know what the answer is, but I really came to believe that incarceration is not an effective solution to the troubles of our society, and it's a symptom of what is wrong as opposed to what is right. I'm not entirely sure what the solution is, but there's something about it that's really quite horrifying. I was transferred to another prison in another town that I won't say the name of, but this prison used to hang people back in whenever it was, but it was the same buildings, it was the same place where people used to be hung. Um, but anyway, because while I was in prison, I was talking about satanic pedophiles, I was talking about a holy war, I was talking about being the Christ reborn. So they ended up um, referencing me to the hospital, to the doctor, the psychiatrist, sorry, for the prison. And that resulted in me eventually getting transferred to a hospital and being prosecuted, not under a um, judicial prosecution, but under a mental health prosecution, basically. So I got something which is called a Section 37, and locked up in a hospital, really. So that's prison. Moving on to hospital.
I just wanted to comment before we move on a point that you made that incarceration might not be the best resolution to a lot of these crimes. Because the thing
Mm,
that I'm realizing, the more that I learn, is that most of the psychopaths aren't in jail. They're walking freely among us. They're the ones
yeah.
that are, the charming people and the ones that have the great reputations in town. And of course, not everybody fits that mold, but it's the typical psychopath. Like they're walking amongst us, they're very high
Mm,
functioning and they're able to put that cover on and that facade. And then a lot of the people that end up getting locked up are the victims of these psychopaths that can't recover from the trauma and end up going down some really dark paths because of it, whether it's becoming an abuser themselves, whether it's not having a home, having to resort to theft, whether it
yeah.
is reenacting, some of the abuses, like you said,
Yeah.
sexual abusers and things like that, different crimes. So you do see where the psychopaths can go in there, but it seems though a lot of the people that end up in these systems are not the ones that should be there by proxy of,
Mm,
being the actual, really abusive criminal personalities. These are a lot of very suffering adults that are dealing with the side effects of things that were never addressed. The root cause of it was never addressed. They
mm,
never had people that cared about them enough
mm,
to help them heal from what it is that helped bring them to the place where they would commit crimes that could get them felonies and get them locked up and get in prison, and you see your story illustrates that and you wonder, hearing from you and so many other survivors who have served 1 day to however many years in prison or in some type of incarceration, whether it's in an actual jail or if that is
mm,
going into, the healthcare system and being admitted for having psychopathy or being
yeah.
crazy, and you wonder how many of these people are actually abuse victims, and right down to being homeless. You talk about all these things, and it just seems so ironic to me that you never hear of the abusers of anybody that is speaking out, going to prison, becoming homeless, being called crazy. It's always the abuse victims that are
Yeah.
getting these different prosecutions and penalties for not having the support that they need to heal from what the psychopaths that are still walking on the street did to them. So I wanted to comment on that because I think that's a really important point. And again, it doesn't
Mm,
go for 100% of people. There are people that genuinely need to be behind bars because they are not safe for society, and there isn't
Yeah.
probably much help that, a psychotherapist or any type of therapy might be able to do for them if they're truly a psychopath and, they're a vicious killer, a pedophile. I'm grateful that some of those people have been, detained. Again, I don't know if it's the best option, but a lot of the people in there, my heart just goes out to because I feel like we've just let them
Mm,
down, that we've just
exactly.
severely let them down, and that they don't have the root cause of what they're going through has never been addressed, and they're being penalized for the side effects of that.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I just remembered something I was going to say earlier when we were talking about parts, but that I forgot. And it was a point that you'd mentioned. We've kind of mentioned it again here, but look, something I believe very strongly is that all of us have a duty to heal as deeply as we can bear. And that, this is talking about starting your healing journey now, whatever your trauma is, whatever your pain. But look, for the world to be made a better place, for the world to be healed and to be made whole, we need to heal and we need to become whole. So there's a huge onus on all of us. There's a huge responsibility on all of us to heal as deeply as we can. And if you survive this type of abuse, look, you're not responsible for what was done to you. But as an adult, we are responsible for our own healing, and we need to take that, and we need to action that as fully as we can.
100%. And then to help educate the people around us that are will be there
Mm,
to listen, and I'm so grateful in your story. You hear of all these ways that people tried to support you. You didn't
mm,
experience evil police officers. They were people doing their job, and maybe they didn't fully
yeah.
understand what you went through, but you seem to have come out of that with a respect for them, and not that
Mm,
they're this evil faction necessarily, that there are actual good people working
yeah.
in these. And unfortunately, a lot of these factions have been infiltrated in some way. There's always bad eggs in every institution, but you see how goodness is also in there, and there are genuinely people who are trying to help. It's just a lot of these systems are so flawed in general, and they've been
Yes.
for so long that, no matter who's working in it, they can't necessarily fix it because it's a big monster. And you see that through your healthcare journey as well. You see all these interventions of people, these genuine people trying to do good. But unfortunately,
Mm,
the system is set up in a way where they have parameters that they have to operate in. It's not their
yeah.
choice how they get to do that. They have to follow certain guidelines and rules. And unfortunately, it's not always the safest or most comfortable environment for somebody who's been through extreme trauma
Mm,
like what you went through.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I would echo what you said, as in, I can respect the police for how they handled it. I think they dealt with the situation really well, and I'm quite grateful for them. And um, they could have shot me. They could have shot me with a baton round even. They tasered me, which was the least violent option available, and they did try to de-escalate it as well as they could. So, our armed police here in the UK, generally speaking, are very well trained. So, I am grateful how that went. In the prison, there were some prison officers that were dickheads, but generally, they were all right. And there was even some really good eggs in there that genuinely wanted to make things better for the prisoners. And as we go into the hospital side of things, one thing that stood out for me, because I was still very much in a very heavy conspiracy mindset, but one thing that did stand out to me is that I didn't pick up on anyone that was a bit narcissistic, or I didn't pick up on anyone that seemed to be a covert something or other. Like, they all seem to be genuine people that genuinely, exactly as you said, they're caught up in a system that doesn't always allow them to do the right thing, but their intentions were pure, and that did really shine through.
Let's talk about that journey going in there. So you, instead of being criminalized and being persecuted as a criminal through the court system, they allowed you to go through the healthcare system thinking
Yeah,
that this was maybe a mental illness or it was delusion, and
yeah,
you instead got put into, or you got admitted, I should say, to be treated for mental health instead.
yes, yes, exactly, exactly, yeah. And I think it was the right choice. I think they actually made the right choice there. But yeah, I got transferred to hospital, to quite a relatively modern hospital. But yeah, I got transferred there from prison one day, and it was strange being there. It was strange being there. In some ways, it was more open and less restrictive because there was a communal space where you could hang out with the prisoner, with your fellow inmates all day, or your fellow patients, I should say. Um, and there was a TV, there was a PlayStation, there was an outdoors courtyard. So in some ways, it was more free, and there was after you've been there for a while, you can work your way up to being able to go to sports or go to the gym or other things. So in some ways it wasn't a bad setup, and in some ways it was less restrictive than prison, but then in other ways it was incredibly restrictive, and you weren't allowed sugar, for example, or you weren't or you had to ask for sugar to put it in your coffee, and there was kettles weren't allowed because they tended to be used as weapons for chucking boiling water on people. So there was a hot tap, but the hot tap didn't get too hot. um but so just lots of little things where if you want to do anything, you've got to kind of ask for somebody's help. In prison, you were able to shave, for example, or in one of the prisons, I was able to shave, I should say, but you weren't able to there. You had to do it under supervision the whole time. So it it could feel very restrictive at times, especially on the admissions ward that I was on for about 6 months, because that was the high risk, the admissions ward, high risk and admissions basically. So that was particularly um, restrictive. But yeah, I was there for probably a week, 10 days before they medicated me. And I'd been having conversations with the doctor. He was forming a very strong opinion that I was heavily deluded and in need of medication. I was saying I didn't want any medication, but that I would engage fully with the psychology team. And can we go the psychology route? But I also had in the back of my mind, I still believed that Wolf was real and that I would turn into Wolf. So I knew the image I had of the system was of this great behemoth, of this great, yeah, this behemoth like monster that was going to swallow me down deep into its belly. And then I was going to turn into Wolf and I was going to tear it apart from the inside. So I knew they were going to force medicate me at some point. I knew that I was going to fight. And I knew that was going to result in them eventually sending me to a more restrictive mental health hospital, and to me probably never getting released unless I can get possessed by Wolf. So that was the pathway that I could see laid out before me. But yeah, basically one day I was outside in the courtyard, and one of the lads said to me, "Oh, I think they're coming for you, Dan." And everyone else had been cleared away, and I was in the main communal area, and there was about 15 various members of staff there, which is normal practice when you're going to force medicate somebody. They knew I didn't want to. I'd refused medication because I didn't believe in it, and I didn't believe it was needed at that point. But it was quite amazing, actually. I remember being stood there and just seeing all of these people stood in front of me. And I remember feeling this incredible tingling sensation I had come down my arms. It was possibly one of the most vivid pre-fight experiences that I've ever had, of just felt my body come online ready to fight in a really palpable way. Anyway, I didn't fight. I let myself be led away to they call it the ECA, the extra care unit. So it's basically a isolation cell. There's just a mattress in there and a bathroom, a toilet. There's a camera in there, and they led me to there. And this is where whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And I had a bit of a standoff with them. It was a female nurse talking to me, which felt a bit unfair because being a man, I would never harm a woman. So I felt a bit frustrated. I was being put in this situation where I wanted to fight, but there was women there that I didn't really want to endanger. So I think that's something that they consciously do with certain patients, because they know that men are less likely to kick off if there's a female present. That was certainly the case in my case. But we had a bit of a standoff for a while. And I was saying, like, no, I don't agree to it. I'm not going to do it. It's wrong. You're going to have to pin me down and force me to do it. And they were kind of begging me, saying, like, Dan, please, it doesn't have to go this way. Just basically, You just need to drop your trousers and we'll jab you in the arse with a needle, basically, and that'll be it, and it will be done with. And I could just feel that I wasn't going to back down. And we had this standoff for a while, and it was kind of rising a bit in tempo. And I just remember I looked over to the wall, and now this could be delusion or this could be real. I'm not entirely sure, but I had the impression of like a white light up on the wall of like something that I couldn't see, but that was there. And as I focused on this, I had the belief that it was the spirit of the girl that was murdered in front of me. And the messages that I kind of got in my mind was like, you don't need to fight. You can take the easy path. You can you can let this go, basically. So that felt like really strong messaging that I was getting from somewhere. Um, and so I ended up letting them jab me without fighting. But if I hadn't have seen that light that was real or imagined, if I hadn't have listened to its message, I would have fought, and I would have ended up in somewhere like Broadmoor Hospital, because I was intending to fight. I was intending to fight, to maim, to kill, and I wasn't going to go quietly. And but anyway, so I let them, I ended up standing against the wall, just pulled down one side of my trousers, and they injected me. And then they left the room and locked the door. And I waited until they left, but I had a very, very, very strong reaction to what they had just done. And I had a rage that lasted for probably 2 or 3 days, where I was just storming around, shouting and screaming, beating the mattress on the floor. I felt so traumatized and violated by what had just happened. The doctor came to visit me. I was telling the doctor through the door that I was going to kill him, that I was going to, if I got my hands on him, that I would kill him, basically. And I just felt so bereft that this had happened. And it felt like such a violation of my body and of my soul, and just everything. It just felt wrong on every level. But then something started happening where the medication started taking effect on me. And to be honest, it was horrific. I had this feeling of almost like a drip in my head coming down, of just like negative thought after negative thought after negative thought. And I started feeling absolutely awful. And then I started feeling really anxious. And yeah, I stopped raging, and I was just fixated on the suffering that was coming through the medication, basically. Um, it took about a week after that, and they eventually let me back out onto the ward when I was calm enough. And it had been a few days of me being calm enough before they let me out. But the first medication they put me on was called Clopixel, and it's quite a harsh medication. And I didn't react well to it. And something that's kind of come to light in more recent months since I've left is that one of the ways that I survived what I survived was although my mind was fractured and broken and in pain, I still had agency in my mind. It was kind of the one place they couldn't reach me. But what happened in hospital is my mind got compromised in a way that I wasn't in control anymore. Um, and that was incredibly unsettling. And then there was just the actual physical effects of taking the medication that was anxiety inducing and really uncomfortable. Um, so yeah, I got, probably for a while, I got in quite a weak state. Not proud of it, I suppose, but I felt a bit broken for a while, really. I really felt like the medication got to me, and just, I was really worried about my sentencing. I was really just like, the worry really rose up and took over me in a way that it never had before. And I was on that medication for probably a couple of months. We managed to get it changed eventually to another medication. I think it's risperidone, that is a less harsh medication, but still wasn't great. But that made it easier. Um, And then eventually, after about 6 months, I was let off that ward and I was put onto a rehabilitation ward. So when they changed my medication and when I realized that I couldn't fight my way out of there, I started cooperating with them and I started working with them. And something that happened in that period of time was I really questioned everything about my story. And I really came to believe that I'd made everything up. And this was a huge part of the reason I had such high anxiety for a while, is because I questioned everything. Genuinely realized that some of what I'd been speaking was delusion. And that led me to question everything and believe everything was delusion. And then everything that I was getting from the doctors was like black and white, like, yep, you've made all of this up. This is all delusional. So that along with the medication was affecting me really strongly. And I suffered for a while. I suffered for a while, you know.
And people working in medical establishments that are not trauma informed as well, and that this isn't part of sort of how they do their practice. We know
Yeah.
how drugs and different substances are used on children who go through
Yeah.
a lot of these extreme abuses. And so,
Mm,
whether that's needles, whether that's pills, whether that's a liquid that they're constantly forcing you to have, I
yeah.
think that alone, even if the side effect from whatever the drug is, isn't maybe as severe as what your reaction was, where you had that drip of negative thoughts, even if the side effects of the drug itself aren't bad, which a lot of times they are.
Mm,
If somebody's not used to taking that, I think generally a lot of survivors, unfortunately, they may be addicted or have addictive personalities to things as they're healing, but I think overall a lot of them try to stay away from doing drugs because it was used
mm,
abusively on them.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
if they're being treated with drugs that put them in a state of maybe not being in control, or that could remind them of different instances in childhood of the memories that they're dealing with right now, trying to contend with as they're healing, and then being thrown and admitted into, a psychiatric ward. I think that alone can just be so traumatizing for a survivor to have those feelings again, no matter what type of drug it is, of just I don't feel in control of myself. I'm being brought back to how I felt as a child again, and then to
Mm,
be sort of outcasted because of that. And again, slapped on the hand and you're the rebellious one, you're the crazy one. It's like you just get gaslit
mm,
over and over again. And it's not because these people are abusers necessarily. It's because they simply don't understand complex trauma, complex PTSD,
mm,
and this type of organized abuse that involves a lot of controlled substances in order to get a child to calm down, to
yeah.
be more submissive, to it's kind of like the same things that they tell you why you need the drugs as an adult. And so
Yeah.
it is really interesting, like the disconnect between that. And then again, going back to how many people are in these hospitals and in these psychiatric wards because they're dealing with the side effects of the trauma, and then they're being
Mm,
reintroduced to some of the same things that traumatized them as a child.
exactly.
It's like just this cycle that is really hard to break away from. And without that trauma-informed education to the medical providers, to them too, it just looks like a patient that's not compliant and somebody that needs
Mm,
their medicine upped, or they need to be put in a room isolated. It's like it's just so backwards how we're treating this type of abuse, and then the PTSD and trauma that comes as a result of it.
yeah. No, you surmised that perfectly, better than I can. Yeah, it felt as if the circumstances of my childhood had been recreated.
Yes.
So every time they went to inject me, I said to them, like, you realize you're violating me, don't you? You realize that I don't consent to this. I'm just letting you do it, but this is violation. So I didn't make it comfortable for them, maybe. But the reason my medication changed, actually, that I forgot, is that every time they injected me, I kind of swelled up. So at the site of injection, I would have an inflammatory response. So luckily, that led to my medication being changed, and luckily that led to me being put on tablets instead of injections, because the injection thing was just such a trigger for me. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Um, but I took my tablets. I never tried to hide it or hide it under my tongue or whatever the trick might be. I was just grateful to not be on Clopixel. And although risperidone wasn't as bad, it was still not great. Um, but yeah, there was all these contributing factors to the anxiety I was feeling at the time. But yeah, another big one was that it felt like exactly as you laid out, like I'm here, they're seeing me as crazy, they're seeing me as the difficult one. I've got to play the game to be good so that I don't get punished or so that I don't get in more trouble. But I did kind of come round, and I'm not entirely sure how it happened, but at some point I just decided, or I made the choice. I guess I realized that I wasn't going to turn into wolf, and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to tear the system apart from the inside. And I was like, well, I want to get out of here as quickly as I can, so I need to cooperate with these people. So I did cooperate with them. I was going to the gym regularly. I went to the gym 5 times a week. I was going to like the peer support classes, and I would engage with my peers positively. And I just started engaging fully with things. I got involved in psychology that I actually found to be really useful. I had a really good psychologist with a wonderful woman who I think we did some really good work together actually, and this is the thing for me with my story is like there's some things about it as we just discussed that was so difficult and so traumatizing, but then there was some stuff that was really good as well, and it's like how do you marry all of that together? And but actually, as I started cooperating with them, it's very fixed and it's very much in a set way, but there is a pathway to get out of there. And the more you engage with psychology, the more you play the game in a way, the quicker you can get out. And so I played the game, but I engaged with it fully. I really did the work in psychology. I really gained a lot of insight and did a lot of healing work. And then there's all the time in between where I was meditating twice a day. I was having really deep conversations with my other patients that were very healing. I started working down at the shop, at the cafe that was there. So it started becoming a more positive thing. And I started working my way towards release, basically, which yeah, was a relief.
And so, in your opinion, I know we had just outlined that these are systems that they're, I would say, even more than being flawed, it's just outdated. Like, we're dealing
Yeah,
with patients the same way today that we
yeah,
have forever. And the only thing that changes really is that it becomes more medicine based, more prescription based, and less
mm,
sort of about healing. It sort of becomes this cycle of what pill do you need to be on? Like, everybody in here
yeah,
needs to be on a medication instead of okay, let's figure out what the root is. And then if you need a
yeah,
pill, we're going to get you a pill. If you need therapy, we're going to get that. We've sort of like just categorized people into these medical conditions, and then there's always a pill for it, right? So, of course,
yes,
there's that.
exactly.
But what do you think, just, if you were to have just your dream of being able to fix this, what are maybe some things that we could start maybe wrapping our mind around? Because I don't think it's impossible that we could have trauma-informed conversations, for example, or push that. Say, hey,
Yeah,
I'm a survivor of this. Can I come in and maybe educate your staff on this? Or for
totally.
therapists to maybe do stuff like that. I think there's little ways that we could maybe help
Mm,
to get your insight on, how you've
ah,
sort of thought about that and, maybe some ways that we could maybe change over time these systems that are
mm.
sort of not working in the favor of trauma survivors.
I love it. Yeah, what a great question. So from talking with people there, there's a surprisingly high number of people that have been sexually abused or have been abused as a child that end up in those places. And despite the good psychology work that goes on, there wasn't really an interest in going into childhood related stuff. It was all psychology to do with the index offense, as they call it. So behavioral patterns, that kind of thing. But they don't really get to the root. They deal with the offense, they deal with what led up to it in psychology, and then they deal with the sickness as they see it with pills, as you rightly say. So my suggestions for improving the service would be to offer a clearer pathway for release for people, to offer psychology, to have many more psychologists in the team, and to offer psychology that doesn't just deal with the index offence and with the what led up to it to prevent reoffending, but also to go into childhood and to do the serious work that's needed in childhood trauma, which causes the problems in the first place, including the mental sickness that led to the offence being committed. So that's one solution. Another one is just generally being better informed for trauma, for PTSD, and for sexual abuse, and particularly, ritualized, satanic abuse is just something that is seen as a delusion and something that's made up. So more education around that, I think, would be important. But then there's also just something around medication. Like I think what they need to be doing, like they have their own dogma. There was a patient that described it brilliantly. I can't quite remember how he said it, but they have their own ideology, and that ideology is around the medicine. And I'm on a really nice, good medication now that's like I'm so grateful for, that I think definitely helps keep me grounded, but that is not invasive in side effects and stuff. So I'm in a really good position. So this applies less for me, but some of the guys are on 3 or 4 different types of medication. They're on really strong dosages. Some people are suffering like they can barely get out of bed, or they can barely be motivated enough to do anything because of the medication they're on. They suffer weight gain. They suffer higher risk from cancer or diabetes, or their life expectancy goes down. So I think they need to have a mindset of, look, just because you become mentally unwell, it's not necessarily terminal for the rest of your life. It's not necessarily necessary to be medicated for the rest of your life, because as far as they're concerned, you're going to be medicated forever, which is horrifying, especially when these medications are so harmful long term to your body and so on. So I think they need to be looking for more psychological work. I think they need to be looking for trials where you are medication free, to see how you do, to see if through the work in psychology and stuff that you do, that you can be taken off medication safely. Um, Things like that are what I would suggest to improve it as a service.
I completely agree with you. And as you were saying that, I was reflecting back also to some of the ways that I think the system in general, the way that you were treated, for example,
Mm,
having even the water, the temperature of your water controlled, and sort of this monitoring of treating you like you're an irresponsible child who's going to go,
yeah.
hurt somebody or be rebellious, and you think about the extreme measures that are taken when somebody might say react out of trauma or being traumatized, start flailing around. And we
Mm,
know from even your story, watching your ab reactions, you had your hands crossed. So you obviously dealt with being tied up as a child, and so have so many survivors. That's a huge part of controlling somebody, is giving them, or I should say, cutting off access to their control of their own body, tying them up and
yeah.
putting them in these very restrictive positions. And what do they do in a hospital or mental institution? They throw you in a straitjacket or tie you down,
Mm,
And so
mm,
you see all these ways that they might be looking at it as helping somebody. And maybe again, for the rare person, that could be an intervention that is something that's needed, but I've also heard, I listened to an interview of a therapist. She went in one day, a therapist that now works with satanic ritual abuse survivors. She had said in an
mm.
interview, before she sort of knew about what satanic ritual abuse was, she had an instinct one day to go in the ward that she managed, and the girl that was in a straitjacket in an isolation room, she took the jacket off and just hugged her, and she said it made such a difference just to give
Wow.
her love and compassion and to
Yeah,
treat her
yeah.
like a wild
God,
animal.
God.
And so you think
Yeah.
about like the system sort of lacks that, like parenting, like these should be people that feel responsibility. If they're going to treat you like a child, they should do it in a way that's with love and compassion. And how
Mm,
can I be there
mm,
for you? How can we support you? Do you need a loving touch? Do you need somebody to just listen to you? Do you need a friend? It lacks
mm.
that. There's like they like isolate you into to treating you almost like you're an animal that needs caged up. which
Yeah.
is the complete opposite of, I think, how healing actually happens. I think like just giving somebody a hug, sitting down and talking to them, listening to them, even if you don't
Mm.
believe in satanic ritual abuse or some of these things that people say and you write it off as delusion, just to give somebody an outlet to talk about it and to feel safe, like goes so far with somebody's healing.
It really does. It really does. Yeah. I had a huge breakthrough and it wasn't even that big a thing, but we were having a managers meeting, which is it's like a 6 monthly meeting with the managers of the hospital. And in that meeting, my doctor basically said that he wasn't calling it all delusion. He just simply said that we can't prove if it's delusion or not. So we have to be a little bit nuanced in our approach to it, basically. And by him not taking a position that was juxtaposed to mine, it just opened up the whole room. It opened me up. I just felt this huge relief of tension. And I was just like, ah, oh, he may not believe me, but he's not actively disbelieving me. And I just felt such a relief. And it was a really beautiful managers meeting. They were like shaking my hand afterwards, like, this is the best meeting we've ever had. And you're doing so well and you're so positive. And it was, it genuinely was. But it all happened because that doctor didn't disbelieve me and voiced that for the first time. And it was such a relief. And so that's to really echo your point of that to be hugged or to be loved or to be, and I think in the UK it's not as bad as it is in America. So they do on the ward try and talk to you and stuff like that, but it's very medicalized here. It's very within a you're treated, like you say, a bit like a wild animal or a bit like a delinquent child that can't be trusted to do anything. And it's this overbearing, overpowering mother kind of like oppressive energy that's just like, but it's really well intentioned. It's really well intentioned. But yeah, exactly. You need that hug. You need that love. You need that love to be transmitted, really. And a lot of the staff do try. They really do try in their own way to do that. And I met some amazing staff there, which I'm really grateful for. So it's not all bad, but just the system itself is very dogmatic and is very so it's just mixed. It's just really mixed. It's both, and that's sometimes more difficult to deal with. It's easier if it's all bad or if it's all good, but it's a really, really is a mixed bag of things.
Yeah, and hearing your testimony both on your channel and now currently, and knowing what I know now about
Mm,
abuse and trauma and the nuances of what children go through as means to control, and as a means to an end. You see how this is duplicated so much in the healthcare system and in the prison system, and
yeah.
it's just really sad that, we haven't sort of come up with a better resolution in a sense to have the compassion needed, I think, to help this, unguard a trauma survivor from their reactions, and
Mm,
to be able to
mm,
offer
mm,
that sort of compassion and care. Going
yeah.
back to that therapist that I was just talking about, she said that patient immediately started getting better, stopped needed restraint, and
Absolutely.
stopped acting out just by a simple hug, just by
Yeah.
somebody showing that they cared about her, and
Yeah.
you wonder like how many patients might start making progress and being able to be trusted and not needing to have the temperature of their water monitored if they just feel believed and they
Exactly.
feel loved, they feel that somebody cares
Exactly.
about them and they feel heard ultimately at the end of the day.
Mm. Yeah, a lot of the time when somebody kicks off or causes a problem, it's due to the restrictiveness that they're facing. So they create a lot of the problems that they're dealing with. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, and
yeah,
like you said, the overbearing parent versus the supportive parent and the loving parent that sits
there.
down and listens and helps you work through your problems instead of
Mm,
looking at the reaction and saying, "Oh, I'm going to lock you up in your room and you're grounded," versus
mm,
like, "Hey, honey, let's come here and talk about this. Like, what are you going through,
mm,
feeling?" And it's just really
yeah,
interesting how like we call it healthcare, but like we're really disconnected from like what that health actually is that
mm,
the person needs as a human, like we need love and compassion and care. And a
mm,
lot of times people that are in these situations, whether it's prison or a mental breakdown of some sort where somebody feels they need an intervention and need admitted, a lot of that is caused by lack of of somebody
Mm.
having lack of love and these really positive
Yeah,
energies that, are very healing for people. So it's really interesting, and your story illustrates that, and I really appreciate you sharing all of that with us.
it's my pleasure. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Um, yeah, they're really trying, like
Yeah.
they're really trying, and just there's in some ways they're so close. I think a big change would be that mindset shift from the parent that says you're grounded to the parent that says, come here, let's have a cup of tea and let's talk about it is would be a shift. And I had one more, but I've just forgotten it. Oh, another shift would be teaching the staff about somatic therapy and about like reading Peter Levine's work, I think would be amazing for them. So they're very old school in the psychology and the psychiatry that they do. So I think bringing in some of Peter Levine's work, if everyone read Waking the Tiger, I think that would just make the world of difference with trauma for people in hospital.
We love book recommendations. So people listening, write that down. Book of the Tiger by Peter Levine, and go read
um,
it. And it's always good to have good recommendations.
yeah, it's amazing. It's such a good book. Such a good book.
And so what happened
Um,
after you got released? What was that like? And how was the reaction from people in your life that
mm,
you knew, whether it was, family members? Did you face anything? I know you had cut them off, but did you face anything where you heard that they're calling you crazy again? Kind of how did you
mm.
start settling into life again after all of that sort of breakdown and devastation and contention and remembering and then going right into all these different, situations where you're in prison and then you're in the healthcare system and now you're out and you get to live life and, what happened after that?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a segue first, if that's okay, of
Absolutely. Yeah.
um, just around forgiveness.
Yes.
So something that started to shift towards the end of my time in the hospital is I joined a spirituality group, and it was led by a couple of Christian pastors, but it was kind of open, and I was more considered myself spiritual at the time. But there was a few books I was reading, which kind of helped. But really, what started coming up was a theme of forgiveness. And I remember at one of the meetings, they were talking about how, in a Christian ideology, under the eyes of God, to it is a sin not to forgive. Now, if you'd have said that to me 6 months before or 12 months before, I would have got really pissed off with it and said, that's rubbish. Like, I don't need to forgive my abusers. I would have had a very strong, but I just had come far enough that I could glimpse there was like a truth to it, as in like, it's not sin, as in I'm bad because I'm not forgiving. It's just that by not forgiving, I'm not setting myself free and I'm holding on to the pain and I'm holding on to the pain to punish them. And I'm believing that vengeance is my duty and that I have to be responsible for vengeance and for justice. And so I was able to, there was a few books that I'd read that had started to shift what was a very fixed perspective of refusing to forgive, of thinking to forgive was to be weak, to enable the abuse that happened against me, to excuse it for what happened to the other children around me. And yeah, something started to shift, and I started working to forgive my abusers. And the practice goes a little bit like this: of whenever you think of them and painful thoughts come up, is basically asking for help from God to because it's too much to forgive on your own. So you kind of need the grace of God to help you forgive them. So it's like, God, help me find the grace, help me forgive these people that have harmed me. And it's just repeatedly doing that again and again and allowing space for the pain, allowing space for the anger, allowing space for the hurt, keeping the good boundaries in place, but also now, which was new for me, was allowing the space to forgive and to seek to forgive them.
And that's one part of your journey that I really honor too, because I think that's honestly one of the most difficult things anybody could go
Mm.
through is contending with trying to forgive people who you could potentially hate with all your might,
Yeah.
and working through, again, it doesn't excuse what somebody did, which I think you contended with that a lot too, of feeling that would mentally be enabling what happened if you said,
yeah,
I forgive this person, not realizing that anger we feel towards somebody, because these people, like, they're not worried about, you look at anybody, it doesn't have to be an abuser. If somebody doesn't like you or if somebody treated you bad, they're sitting on cloud nine, a lot of
mm,
times. And I'm
mm,
not saying your parents were doing that, but just in general, people who tend to be bullies, they're not sitting there thinking about their victims all the time. They're just living
mm,
their life and going about it like it's the victim, the one that's holding that string to the other
yeah,
person and feeling the guilt and feeling the shame, feeling all those negative emotions. So we have a string tied to somebody who doesn't have one back. It's like this energy that we're just continuing to give them even
yeah,
after the abuse of whatever it was stopped. We're continuing to feed them our energy and to give that to them instead of giving it to our healing or giving it to somebody
mm,
else that we love or giving it to a project that we want to work on. And those negative feelings can be so restrictive too with what we're able to do. Like it's hard to be angry and rageful and creative at the same time or
mm,
productive at the same time. A lot of times those negative emotions can make us
yeah,
just want to stay in bed, make us just want to isolate, and so again, like we're kind of like holding a string to somebody. It doesn't excuse what they did. It's just like we're kind of cutting that and saying, you don't have power over me anymore. I'm taking that
mm,
back. I'm going to spend that energy on me. You go do what you're going to do. I'm never going to talk to you again. I don't excuse what you did. It wasn't right, but I'm taking my power back so I can move on with my life and I'm not going to give you any more of my energy anymore.
yeah,
And so that's like a really powerful sort of exchange of power, I think, between like abuser and victim. I feel like that's a
mm,
big point when a victim can become more of a survivor, more of a thriver, more of an overcomer when they cut that string, however that looks. And forgiveness can mean something completely different to different people, but
yeah,
I think ultimately just cutting that string and not letting that person run your life anymore and have any more control over you. It's giving yourself a gift in that way, and it can be hard to define. I think forgiveness can be a word that can seem offensive to people. So however somebody wants to word that, if that's not how you want to word it, find a word that suits you. But I think that's a really beautiful part of your journey that you figured out how to cut that string and you did it in a
mm,
way that was protecting yourself and other people. It wasn't enabling anything. It didn't
yeah,
excuse anything. If it was standing your ground and saying, this isn't okay, and I'm going to walk away from it, and I'm not going to give any more of my energy to it anymore.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And well, you summed it up so beautifully there. It did, it did release a weight from my shoulders that I was carrying that I didn't realize I was carrying, and I guess I have moved more towards God in a Christian way, whereas before I was more spiritual and yeah, more of a spiritual type, I would say. But now my faith has changed, I suppose, and forgiveness, loving your neighbor, those kinds of things are very much at the heart of what I aspire to be, or aspire to be like. But yeah, the forgiveness is just huge, and I got a bit lighter, I got less heavy, um, and it just worked. It just everything came together really well with my psychology, with the spirituality group, with all these different things. I was really integrating and coming back to a more wholesome place in perfect time for me to be released. So the system, in its own broken way, it did work in its own way, which I kind of feel a bit mixed about saying, but there's ways that it really helped me, and I have to acknowledge that, and I'm grateful for that. I am grateful for that. I just wish it was a bit less of the overbearing parent, the restrictive parent, um, but yeah, so I was released, and it felt strange initially. I felt still like I was locked up, and there's like this background anxiety you feel sometimes when you're locked up or when I was locked up in hospital at least, that I just thought was never going to go. But now that I've been out a bit longer, like that's gone, and I'm enjoying my life, and I feel free, and I feel very much in my life again. To answer your question with my family, I did have some more email contact from my father back at Christmas time. And I did allow myself to have some dialogue with him, and I was really open to at the time. I was like, yeah, maybe I've made up about my dad being involved. Maybe it's just it was a friend of the family that abused me, and I've just confused that somehow. So I just played with that and I just explored that in conversation with him. But I had the same dogmatic responses from him that that was impossible, that nobody could have ever abused me. You know, at this point, I'd relived hundreds of hours of being raped, and I'd relived. There was a vague, not even that really, but there was a vague chance that I'd somehow imagined it about my father, but that I had just been raped by somebody. But just talking to him, I just, I felt gaslit. I felt undermined. I felt my anxiety rise. I just knew it wasn't. Yeah, so I cut contact with him again and he kept messaging me. So I've ended up reporting him to the police and getting them to message him to stop contacting me, basically. So that was my contact with my father. I had one email from my mother when I was released from hospital, and it was to the effect of, oh, now that your sickness is under control, you know, I hope we can come back together and I hope everything can be okay. Words to that effect, really, but just writing everything off as a mental illness and not acknowledging anything that had happened. And I had some brief dialogue with my brothers, but I basically said, like, look, guys, you know, nothing's changed for me. I still believe dad abused me. I still believe that I was raped and abused as a child, and I still believe that I protected you. And as much as I love you, you know, like the reality is you just weren't there for me when I needed you, and we can never change that. We can never change that now. And I don't think there's a way back for us. Even if, you know, like I have a belief that when my father dies, when he passes away, I have a belief that memories will be freed up in my system, and I'll have more normative memories that I can refer to, and possibly that'll happen for my brothers as well. But even if that happens, when he dies, we suddenly start remembering, which is quite a common phenomena for survivors. It's not going to change the reality that they weren't there when I needed them. And I'm just not going to permit, in honor of the boy that I once was or the man that I now am, I'm not going to permit anyone that abandoned me at such a precious time, such a tender time. Like it was the biggest opportunity to cement, to sanctify our relationship, you know, and they just they dropped the ball. They dropped the ball, and they're still dropping the ball. And there's just no space for them in my life, you know, which is sad, but it's also freeing. It's also freeing.
It's really sad how these situations break up families. Like you said, it's such an opportunity for people to come together and do what's right.
Mm,
Even if
mm,
somebody doesn't have memories, which your brothers may not, but to just
mm,
outcast you and to gaslight you like your father did, in a sense of
mm.
sort of taking his side and not coming to you
Yeah,
and saying, "Hey, I don't know what you're going through, but like you're my brother and like I'm going to be here for you and try to
exactly,
understand it as best as I can." Again,
exactly,
you look at like what a
exactly.
normal reaction is versus not,
Yeah,
and even if they didn't harm you in the same way that some of your abusers did, like it was still such a betrayal for you to have to go through that alone when they could have at least acknowledged you and stood by you through that, even if they didn't understand it.
exactly, exactly. And the thing is like I know if the shoe was on the other foot, if I had no memories and my brothers were saying that, I just knew I would have stood by them. But I just know that in the way that you've described. But I can just see the ways that they've bought into the narrative about me that my father, that my mother has peddled about me since I was a child. And there's ways that I've played into that narrative through my own wounding and my own failings as a person. So there's some proof in the pudding, but equally there's a whole load of bullshit as well. And yeah, there's no coming back from it, you know?
Since you sort of starting to speak out, whether it was to family, online, just being more vocal about what you went through, have you experienced any type of targeting, any type of threats, anything from family or elsewhere for making that decision?
I haven't, to be honest. No, I mean, I thought when I had the memories first come back, I felt very strongly that my life would be in danger if I spoke out. And I believe that if I was naming names and things like that, I believe that trouble would find me. But I haven't had any explicit threats or anything made against me, no. It was more me when I was unwell. I was making threats against people. So swearing vengeance and wanting to get them.
What advice would you give to survivors who have gone through something, whether it's similar to yours or completely different, but it's something that really traumatized them and they're really scared to tell somebody, they're really scared to stand up, they're really scared
Mm,
to speak out. What advice would
mm.
you give them? Because that can be a really big step to overcome for somebody.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. You've got to be careful about who you talk with. You've got to be careful because not every psychologist is going to be able to honor it and hold it. Not every friend is going to be able to. So I would be really discerning. I would be extremely cautious with your own family, depending on what your relationship with your family is like. Um, but it is also important that you find somebody to talk to about it. So a combination of extreme discernment, but also extreme determination to speak out about it. So find somebody, reach out to somebody, and find a way to start talking about this. Ideally a therapist, but look for like a trauma informed, maybe a CSA informed therapist that you can talk to basically. And you know, there's normally a friend or two out of the group of friends that you can trust. So figure out which ones those are and then also I would just do as much study on the topic as you can. So on the list of resources on my website, or there's other sources of there's the CSA blog. Um, yeah, this oh great, yeah, the support page. So you can go to Survivor Story /support and yeah, just study up on it. The CSA Survivors blog is a really good resource as well. But just study up on it as much as you can, and the more educated you are, the more you know how to deal with the various aspects of it, and the more resources you have that you can point other people towards so that they can study up about it themselves and be better informed and be better prepared and enabled to support you in the way that you need. Um, so that would be my advice.
I was muted. How has speaking out, whether it was to a therapist, to somebody safe,
Yeah,
online,
yeah.
how has that been healing for you?
Oh, it's the most amazing thing. It's the most amazing thing. And just even, I mean, even with you, Emma, just you are so confirming and understanding and knowledgeable and wise and caring. It's just when so much of what you get out there is disbelief and ridicule and personal attack, and just to receive that is like the sun breaking through the clouds after a month of heavy rain, and it's just wonderful. It's to to speak out with the right people, and I've got some good friends that I can do that with. I have had some good therapists that I can do that with. It's just it's the breath in the wind, you know, it's the wind in the sail, it's the sun on your face after a long cold winter. We're meant to heal in tribe, we're meant to heal in relationship. The wounding is caused in relationship, but the healing happens in relationship as well, and it is essential and it's beautiful, and it is such a gift when you do have those people that believe you, that understand, that want to be there for you. It's, I mean, I'm so grateful for those people, including you, Emma, including you. Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's the rain after a long drought. It's exactly what is needed to heal.
It's interesting to me how really these days in society, we've been so poison primed through the media, through movies,
Mm,
through these sort of professional speakers, personal development people, and then, even podcasters and just the different ways that we watch conversation. And it's so scripted. And you go on social media and people put the best moments of themselves looking perfect with filters. And we forget sometimes that like the most healing thing that we can do is talk about the things that are not perfect, to talk
mm,
about the
mm,
things that hurt us. That's really the
yeah.
one thing that we all actually have in common. We all don't have the best clothes, the best purses, the best cars, the best public speaking skills, but we've all gone through something hard. And for some reason, it's the one thing that like we never talk about on a daily basis with people. And of course, it can be sort of negative to always talk about those things. And some people might feel drained from doing that consistently. So I'm not saying that that's something that we have to do like every moment of every day, but it is interesting just how healing being able to talk about our hardships can be when it's like the one thing that we're sort of conditioned not to do. We're sort of
Yeah.
conditioned to like have these scripted kind of robotic conversations. Everything's great, everything's good, I'm
Mm,
doing awesome. How are
mm,
you? And of course, it's great to actually feel that way, and it's wonderful that we can have really positive conversations. But it really brings us back hearing these different testimonies, and hearing how healing it is to speak out. It's
mm,
crazy that it's not encouraged more, that we're having these conversations and trying to relate to each other
mm,
on a deeper level than just these sort of fake facades that we put on every day to go to work and to be in public, and it's so just disingenuous. So I think like for everybody, whether you're a trauma survivor or not, just being real and being able to be seen for who you are, whether that's something really horrible that you went through or just admitting that you don't feel good or you don't feel confident today. I think feeling seen in those moments is just such a beautiful part of dialogue that we've really lost along the way somehow.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. Amen.
And
Yeah, and I
you,
really think that's the beginning. That's the beginning. If you can be open about your own life and you can be curious about other people's lives, it's much easier to be the type of person that can support somebody that goes through something really difficult like this.
100%. And one thing I'm really excited that you're doing, because you're such a brilliant speaker and you do wear your heart on your sleeve, and you're so articulate and good at speaking about this stuff in a palatable way. We talked about a little bit about it last time, Survivor's Story, which is your project, your baby that you've birthed to bring into this movement to help heal
Mm,
particularly male survivors, to give them a voice, but really your platform's for all survivors. You just have a special place in your heart as a male, knowing male sexual child abuse is so much less talked about, and men feel so much more shame with that. So I love that that's sort of the heart
mm.
of kind of your purpose, but really your movement's for all survivors, hence the name Survivor Story. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about this project, about your podcast, about the testimony that you have on your YouTube channel, your website, and sort of, give us a little information about it and kind of what you foresee this evolving into.
I don't feel prepared for this. Yeah, no, thank you, Emma. I'd love to talk about it. Yeah, Survivor's Story is really about sharing the story of survivors. I've shared my survivor story on there. I am inspired to interview other survivors, male or female, although, as you say, I do have a particular place in my heart for my fellow man, for my fellow survivor. I just, I just want it to be a resource that can help people. And I want to share my stuff, but to be honest, it's not really even about me. I've just put my story on there first to kind of get it out of the way a bit, really. It's got at the bottom of the homepage is the interview series from my story. The third one in that part is the body flashback memories. But yeah, I would love to have other people's stories on there. So if it's something you're interested in, just normal CSA is absolutely fine. It doesn't need to be SRA. But I would love to interview and I would love to share your story with the world. Yeah, I just think the more we can talk about this and the more we can normalize talking about it, it's this. abuse exists in the shadows. This abuse exists because so many people are ignorant of it. And the more we can educate people about it, the better chance we have of minimizing how often it occurs. So that's really my hope with it. Yeah, yeah, it's my baby. It's my baby. It's one of my babies. And yeah.
And your website, you not only have your testimony, and I love how on your YouTube channel you were very vulnerable in saying, "Hey, if I'm going to be asking other people to share their story, I need to live by example and go first." And so I love that you took that initiative. And Daniel does have, if you missed that on the screen, I'll go back to it real quick. At Survivor's Story is his YouTube handle, and he does have hours of his own personal testimony on here in three different parts, sort of broken up into different parts of his life, including the flashback footage, which if you guys watched the last episode, we showed a very little bit of that. It's actually a 3 hour and almost 10-minute video. Very little talking from Daniel. It's all footage from an actual treatment that we talked about in the last episode. So I think that's a really important episode to validate so much of what we hear about survivors sharing, how debilitating their healing can be, and how misunderstood it is because going through flashbacks of ritual abuse in the ways that Daniel and others have gone through it, it's very different than, some of the trauma that people without these dissociative tendencies who have compartmentalized memory go through healing. And so I think it's a really important video to help us understand the different ways that our body can heal and remember, recall memory, and live out the actual healing process through actually remembering it and going through it again through our bodies. And then he has two parts to his actual testimony that are beautifully done. The interviewer was so compassionate with you, Daniel, and I
Mm.
loved the vibe that you guys had on that,
Oh,
and you disclosed a lot on there just like how you did on here. So I definitely encourage people to go watch that and support it and share it. There's a lot of information in there that's very gently told. So I think it's a very palatable way for these stories to be heard. And then on his website, which is survivors-story.com, this is the best place to contact you, right, Daniel, on the contact tab if somebody
yes.
listening does want to be on your podcast or get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, through the contact page. Yeah, get in touch. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you.
And he also has a blog, so some of the memories he's written out in a very eloquent way. So if you guys want to support him that way, if you guys want to read and share that on your social media, it's really helpful. And so is subscribing to channels such as YouTube. It's not every day that YouTube and other platforms really promote this content. So we sort of have to be the champions to do that for creators who are online talking about these really hard topics. If you physically go to the page and hit subscribe, it can really make all the difference in the world for this to possibly get seen by other people and for it to come up in their feed. And
Yeah,
same thing with the website. He does have a really great resource page on here too. If you're an advocate and maybe are looking for a space where you can find some literature to learn more about this or to be able to share in your social media. The one article that he mentioned, I think, is fantastic earlier. Pedophiles know dissociation. Do you? That was a really eye-opening article that should, raise a lot of eyebrows with people on what they know about trauma and, why most of society doesn't know about this, but yet the most vile predators in the world committing the worst crimes against humanity and children know about how trauma works in our body, but most of society doesn't. So there's a lot of really great resources on this page. And again, the contact is right on the website too. And Daniel, was there anything today that you wanted to cover that we didn't get to yet, or was there anything else that you wanted to add on to any of the topics that we discussed already?
um, well, I think we've covered a lot, actually. I think we've covered a lot.
We did.
No, I just would echo the tagline on my website, really. Like, we're all heroes and our stories deserve to be heard. Emma, I think you're doing an amazing job. God, if I could be half as professional and as thorough as you, I would be very happy. Yeah, no, just thank you. God, it's been a journey, isn't it? It's been a journey.
It
Yeah.
has, and I hope you'll come on again. I know we covered most of your testimony, but I think as your journey evolves too,
Mm.
And there's so many things that like how we did today, the deep dive on family stuff. I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of great information that you have to offer and wisdom that we can learn from
Mm.
through your journey and through all these different aspects of
Yeah.
these systems that you've gone through and have faced head on and overcome. And I just want to honor you and honor Wolf and Danny and every part of you for helping get you to where you are today, because it's an absolute miracle that you're here, that we get to hear your story, that we get to now experience your contributions to this movement and to the world in the way that you were intended to give them, not in the ways that your abusers tried to manipulate you into using your gifts. So thank you for sharing with us and for everything that you're doing out there. And like I said, I'm just really excited to see how your journey unfolds and how God uses you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Emma. I'm melting. Yeah, thank you. Just yeah, it's been such a privilege to be here, and I really love that we dive deep actually on the family side of things, and I just that was really worthwhile, I think, and I think I've talked about things here that I haven't talked about in other places, but I really like that. I really like that, and yeah, I think we've done well. I think we've done well then.
Well, we can't wait to have you back. And for people listening, again, I'm going to have Daniel's information in the show notes. So please get in touch with him, even if it's just for encouragement, even if you're not looking to be on a podcast. It's so good that we all connect and come together and contribute together. It's the one thing the enemy doesn't want. And it's a beautiful way for us to sort of come together in a non-violent way and fight this. If we come together and collaborate and share our gifts and encourage each other to keep going and help each other build each other's projects. And of course, if you're a survivor, go to that contact page, reach out to Daniel if you're wanting to share your story on a platform. It's also really wonderful to have somebody on the other side of the screen that can understand you. And
Mm,
survivors interviewing other survivors, I think is really beautiful. A lot of podcast hosts that are hosting survivors are super disconnected and it can be a little bit awkward. So I think it's a great
mm,
opportunity for us to connect with each other and to help support each other as we're in these vulnerable moments of sharing. And I'll have all my information in the show notes as well, you guys. Please connect with me wherever you can. By the time you guys see this interview, my YouTube channel is updated up to the current video. So this video that you're watching right now, along with every following video, will be streamed live as they come out on YouTube as well. So if you're on Rumble or on a different channel and you want to follow me back on YouTube, I'll have my YouTube channel below. Follow Daniel on YouTube as well. Share his content. Go read his blog. Hype him up. So you guys, thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.